Special meeting of the Annapolis City Council on Monday, June 25th, 2018 will be called to order at 7 p.m. At this time, would everyone willing and able please stand for the invocation given by Alderwoman Pendell Charles, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
She's moving to California tomorrow morning.
Oh.
She's in rehab right now.
Okay.
But wishing her well.
Okay. Fine. Good evening. First of all, I've just been notified by Alderwoman Finlayson that my predecessor, Alderwoman Classy Hall, will be transitioning to another location in our United States. She will be leaving Annapolis, and she's currently in rehab, but we wish her all the best and Godspeed. Dear God, help our words be true. Help our actions be honest. Help our lives to reflect your holiness and shine God's light for all to see. Help us to live with integrity. We thank you, God, for the opportunities to use the gifts that you have given us for your service today. Help us to do so in obedience, expecting nothing more than your well done as a reward. And dear God, please give us the strength to go against the flow of this world. Help us to resist what is wrong in your eyes and to act in ways that please you for the glory of your name. Amen.
Amen.
Sure.
Okay. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Mayor Buckley.
Here.
Alderwoman Tierney. Here. Alderman Payon.
Here.
Alderwoman Pendell Charles.
Here.
Alderwoman Finlayson. Alderman Rodriguez.
Here.
Alderwoman Henson. Here. Alderman Savage.
Here.
Alderman Arnett.
Present.
Mr. City Attorney, please read the first item on the agenda.
First item on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
At this time, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended to add R-29-18, extension of deadlines for submissions of proposed union agreements on second reader.
Mr. Mayor. Do we have that?
Alderman Savage.
Thank you. I'd like to also move to amend the agenda by removing R2318 from the agenda. I'm withdrawing that resolution.
And it's our
It needs to get reworked. R2318.
Point of information,
Alderman Arnett.
do we have a copy of the resolution we're adding?
Regina.
We will get you one. We provide you one with one at the last meeting.
Pardon me?
It's the hiring freeze. No, it's not. I'm sorry. We'll get your copy. Give us
Thank
2
you.
minutes.
Point of information.
Alderwoman Finlayson.
Are we removing the union agreements from the consent calendar, or are we moving them off of the agenda, period?
We haven't gotten to the consent calendar, but that is we are planning to remove them from the consent calendar, and they will be the last items acted on your agenda tonight. When it's time to approve the consent calendar, they're going to be removed.
So what is the motion, the request to remove?
This is just to approve the agenda. We're not at the consent calendar part of the meeting.
But what are we removing from the agenda?
Nothing at this point.
Yes.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry. R23 is Rob's legislation. Is on the agenda for second reader. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But, point of information, does that mean we will not even see the union agreements
Let's
before
get
we
the-
vote on them?
Let's get Teresa. Teresa, can you give us some clarification on that, please?
No? What am I clarifying?
Add R-29-18, extension of deadline for submission of proposed union agreements.
The Alderman's question was, will they be provided with the agreements tonight?
We will, so the police union literally in the last hour ratified their contract. We don't have a signed agreement to provide. We are prepared this evening to go over what each of the agreements does with you. You can choose to approve those as a business item later when you pull it off the consent calendar, or we can wait until July to do it, but they are all before you tonight for ratification if you choose to ratify tonight.
But I guess my
Alderman Ahmed.
point would be, they're not before us. I mean, where are they?
We are prepared to walk you through them. Like I said, literally, one of them was approved in the past hour. It is not signed. We can tell you what all of the changes are. We can tell you the fiscal impact of each of the changes. And you can decide whether that is sufficient for your purposes or not. And if you don't think that's sufficient, then you can vote in July on them.
Alderwoman Finlayson?
Yes, for clarification, postponing a vote tonight will not postpone the implementation of the negotiated agreements.
I'm going to defer to Ms. Hopkins on that. Yeah.
Good evening, Tricia Hopkins, Human Resources Manager. Do you mind repeating your question?
If we postpone action this evening, will the implementation of the negotiated agreements be July 1 or at a later date?
As we always have done, if we do not complete all of the processes necessary for adoption of a collective bargaining agreement, at the point at which we do, we will have to go back and do retroactive payments or other kinds of benefit provisions. It's messier, honestly, when we're this close. As you know, when we went through the IBB process, we really didn't wrap up things until October of 2013, and so we had to go back and retroactively calculate and apply all of the cost of living increases and other benefits that were provided.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll do our work. We will do what's right.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Henson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Hopkins, we were sent 4 of the union agreements in various forms of being signed and not signed earlier today. Those 4, are police and fire absent from those 4?
No, it's the 2 ASME unions, so it's our labor and trades and our clerical technical ASME groups, which are 2 of the 4, and then fire is the 3rd, and UFCW, which is police, is the 4th. So we actually have ratification in terms of membership vote approving the work that we have done at the bargaining table and beyond, and those we have actually representatives from each of those unions here tonight as well to further clarify that for you if you desire.
So we do have copies of the agreements as they have been negotiated, but not necessarily the ratified ones?
What the process is we sit down at the table, we come up with, in some cases, a summary document that's only the negotiated items. And so what you'll have for the AFSCME groups is a summary of those changes. And we actually had the council and the union council representative and the union president sign off on them. I have spent time incorporating them into draft agreements. We do not sign those agreements officially, all of the signatories, and then the mayor included in that to make it official until it's been through ratification with the council. So we don't enact what we've done until we go through our council process as well. So to say they're not ratified is kind of partially true, but that's our process includes the council as a step before we get to the point of putting our pen to that final paper. And
the testimony from Ms. Sutherland is that one of them was just, I don't know what the proper term is, agreed to
the
today?
membership just completed their vote within the hour.
And was anything changed from what was given to us?
For police?
Yes.
You haven't been given anything for police.
Right, I have handouts,
Okay.
and as Ms. Sutherland provided before, I think it's really best for us to walk you through everything that we did. If you sat there and tried to digest everything, I think it's just more meaningful for us to spend the time and really explain what went into that process and why we ended up agreeing on the items that we agreed to. I think it's pretty remarkable that we are, even though it's a cliffhanger, it's pretty remarkable that we're here and we can bring to you tonight all 4 of those. So I'm very pleased to say that.
So I just want to be clear about what it is that I reviewed. The 4 that we have do include the police one that was just agreed to?
I'm not
or-
sure what you have before you,
I
so
can
that might be
respond to that
helpful.
because I'm the one who sent it to you. What you received this afternoon was the 2 AFSCME agreements. So you have the agreements themselves, which aren't signed, but it is the agreements themselves, and then you've got a summary for each, which was really the working document that we were using in negotiations that show only those provisions that had some change to it. But we will walk you through all
Yeah.
of the changes for all of the unions
And
tonight.
so it's the cliff notes, so to speak. Those, what happens is, both sides will bring what they want to negotiate over. So, the document that you have that has, as I said before, a signature from the Council 67 representative and from the president of the union means that that's what we all agree to will go into the collective bargaining unit, or CBA for short. And so you have an ASPE document, that's the summary, and the draft of what it would look like in a memorandum of agreement.
So I didn't see anything here that referenced some of the things that we discussed for the police negotiations.
That's correct.
So I don't have that
You
one at
don't
all.
have that.
Okay.
We will walk you through that. And,
Okay.
and, you know, it'd be hard to give you something that hadn't yet been fully accepted, and it's better if we just go over what we've landed on.
Is the police union negotiation the only one that we don't have before us?
I'm not sure that you have.
Did you send them fire?
No.
No, you
No,
don't
I
have
have.
fire either.
Police or
Yeah.
Fire was also ratified today,
Okay.
a little bit earlier today, but
Yes.
today nonetheless. So you don't have police or fire because they've both been ratified in the last
And,
8 hours.
And what we have, because the public safety is a little more involved, we negotiated some changes to the pension plan document. And we've done some other things that we'll explain in greater detail to tell you how we got where we got to. We've brought our labor attorney with us as well. We use a professional individual an attorney who has a lot of experience in negotiating with public safety units, who served as our chief spokesperson. We brought him here with us tonight to help go through very carefully what we have done. We are prepared because, in the interest of all of those trees, we have brought it to project on the screen there so that we can provide that to you, but also have some hard copies of the shorter versions of some of those documents so you can follow along for those that don't feel as comfortable looking at the screen.
Thank you.
It's just that collective bargaining agreement is lengthy and maybe a little more difficult to weed through than summary information.
Thank you.
All right? Anything else?
Alderman Tierney?
Yes, hi, I'm confused. Well, just answer me this. In our city council agenda, we got 3 attachments, and I don't think I'm asking the same question as Shanika, but because they were best and final offers dated June 15, and they were AFSCME for labor and trade, and they were AFSCME for clerical and technical. Best and final offers June 15th.
Correct.
So when I read those, I thought, well, they're not, the term ratified is incorrect. They're best and final offers, they're not ratified. And then the third attachment was local fire, and that was, it appeared to be a ratification, but I'm hearing now it isn't.
Do you have a third attachment?
Yeah, we had local,
It looks like Regina has uploaded the fire
yeah,
contract as well.
Okay.
So they're all our best and final offers.
Okay.
Which the union's leadership has taken to their respective memberships.
yeah,
And those memberships have voted in favor of ratifying the contracts.
Oh.
So we will now present them to you for your ratification. What I guess has been uploaded at this point are the 2 AFSCME ones that I sent you this afternoon. Fire has been uploaded since it got ratified earlier today.
that's what it looks
And,
like,
and
yeah.
police, you don't have anything on yet because it just happened. And we will walk you
But you
through all of
will.
it.
You will. Is that, we keep using this, I think what's confusing is we keep using the same word of ratification. And so the stages in that whole process are, you sit down, you come to some agreement. the bargaining members of both sides agreed, this is where we are, handshakes, then that is taken to the membership to determine if they agree, because obviously you have a select group of individuals representing the union, and it must be adopted by the membership. And when we get through that part of the process, then we come to you. When we're finished with your portion of it and you're okay with what we have done through the agreements, then we just simply go back and sign that
So
memorandum.
if it's signed, though, you did upload the signed one, why does, I mean, that's.
That signed
Yeah.
document, taking you back
That's
to
a
what I
pretty big
first
deal
said
that
about the
it's-
process.
Yeah.
That signed one is what we have agreed to as the best and final offer, accepted best and final offer. And then that goes to the membership for their vote. So the collective bargaining agreement, you have for the AFSCMEs, and now for fire, you have a draft
Yeah.
of when we take what is the best and final voted upon, agreed to elements of what we have accepted between management and union for the contracts themselves, that's put into a draft format, and that it's not until we've been through this part of the process, we say, okay, now we're good. Now we can adopt that. That can then be our collective bargaining agreement that will obtain the proper signatures that are, you'll see are blank on the last page of that document.
Okay, I think we need a flow chart.
We're still on approval of the agenda. When we get to those items on the agenda, I will walk you through them, just like I walked you through all those amendments, okay?
So, we're going to modify that. So at this time, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended to add R-29-18 extension of deadline for submission of a proposed union agreement and remove R-23-18 on second reader. Okay?
And withdraw
Withdraw it, remove it, sorry, yeah.
both, yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Rob. Okay.
Somebody
Is there a
second
motion?
that yet?
Can I get a motion?
A motion to amend the agenda?
Yes.
So moved.
Second.
So moved.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, thank you. Motion passes. Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda is ceremonial items, beginning City Council citation to Oscar Ross.
Okay, Mr. Ross, please join me at the front table. We have a citation here for Mr. Ross, and I'm going to pull my glasses out to read this to you. On behalf of the citizens of the City of Annapolis, we are pleased to confer upon you this City Council citation in recognition of your outstanding service to the City of Annapolis. During a trip to Annapolis during the last week of April into May, visitors staying at the Lowe's Hotel decided to venture out and around Annapolis. Natives of Arkansas, and not knowing where they were going and how to get there, relied on city bus drivers who came to their rescue. We, the members of the Annapolis City Council, commend you for going above and beyond the call of duty to assure residents and visitors getting around the city safely by providing additional information and making their trip enjoyable. Your steadfast dedication to the safety and livelihood of all those who require assistance is demonstrated by your actions. We applaud you for your exemplary work and embody the honour and values of the Annapolis Transportation Department. Thank you so much. This is signed by all the city councillors. And the story is this guy here, some people from out of town, they could not say enough about how far he went to help them. And this is a great thing. This is a great message about what we want to tell people that come into the town, and I thank you for doing that. This is for you. Cheers, buddy. Thank you. Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda is City Council citation to the Haka Hurricanes coaches and volunteers for the championship victory. Congratulations, Hurricanes.
All right, can you guys meet us up the front counter, front desk? Awesome. So, champions, cheers, great job, awesome, great job. Okay. On behalf of the citizens of the City of Annapolis, we are pleased to confer upon you this City Council citation in recognition of your 4th consecutive City of Annapolis 12U Baseball League Championship. The city celebrates your excellent teamwork and outstanding good sportsmanship. We appreciate your efforts to provide leadership to our outstanding youth in the city. And so I have one for you on this front. I'm going to be there for the 5th final. We can win that too, okay? Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda is City Council citation to the Claire Drapeau Claire, is that the correct pronunciation? Drapeau? In recognition of the 1st annual Annapolis Pride Walk.
All right.
So Claire Drapeau.
Join us at the front, guys. Right. So, on behalf of the citizens of the City of Annapolis, we are pleased to confer upon you this City Council citation in recognition of your leadership in organising the 1st Annapolis Pride Walk in honour of the city's LGBTQ+ community. Your confidence, courage, kindness set an example for the whole city to honour and recognise the contributions of all members of our community. We commend your efforts to make our city a more accepting, aware and tolerant society. Nice job.
Would you like to have her parents?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
I had a photograph with her parents.
Oh, sorry?
Bring the parents up?
Oh, yeah, come on, you want to come up for a picture?
Okay.
Okay, Mr. City Attorney, next item on the agenda, please.
The next item on the agenda is petitions, reports, and communications, beginning with reports by committees.
Alderwoman Pindell Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Public Safety Standing Committee met on June the 4th at 6 p.m. Alderman Payone as well as Alderwoman Henson. ID 14518 was presented, the Annapolis Collaborative for Change Grant, Safe and Thriving Communities, Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention. Presented with a history of the grant, background, report update, city's roles, next steps by Dr. Pam Brown, Executive Director of the Anne Arundel County Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families. ID 18118, Fire Department update, answer to questions raised by public regarding the EMS responses and hospital status update. Fire Chief Stokes, Captain Edwards, and Deputy Chief Simmons were present and answered questions from the committee. ID 18218, update on hurricane preparedness, citywide preparedness exercise on August 16, 2018. Director of Office of Emergency Management Simmons, Fire Chief Stokes, and Training and Education Outreach Coordinator Thomas were present and answered questions from the committee. ID 18818, update from the Annapolis Police Department, Police Chief Baker and Deputy Chief Simmons were present and answered questions from the committee. The next meeting of the Public Safety Committee will be held on Monday, July 2nd, 2018 at 6 p.m. here in City Council chambers. Thank you.
Alderman Payone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hopefully, after this evening's meeting, we will have our audit committee put together at long last. We do not have a meeting date, time, place yet, but we will work on that very quickly and hopefully get started.
Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Environmental Matters Committee met on June 20th, and we recommended the food handling, the foam, EPS foam ban with amendments from the law office. Thank you for the amendments. Greatly simplified it and still met the goal intention. And then for R2218, Watershed Restoration Fund, which will come up tonight, we did recommend favorably that resolution. And then that's basically it. So thank you.
Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Finance Committee met on June 20th on things other than the budget, finally. But we received a very good presentation from Santec, Dave Hyder, who went through the process or how we calculate the water and sewer rates. The good news is that there's not a very big increase in the water and sewer rate. The other interesting part about the presentation, which was just a quick brief, is how we do the stormwater restoration rate, and he promised to come back and go through that with us. That's new and is important, and I recommended that we have well, first of all, it could be a council work session, but certainly Finance and Environmental Matters ought to hear that briefing. I'm quite impressed with the thoroughness of their model and also the flexibility, because if we decide to look at different ways of doing things, they can model that for us, and I think we have a very good company doing work for the city. So it was a good presentation.
Alderwoman Finlayson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just an announcement, the Rules and City Government Committee will be meeting on July 10th at 4 o'clock here in council chambers, and the agenda will be posted prior to the meeting. Thank you.
Alderman Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Housing and Human Welfare Committee did meet on June 19th. We did have before us Resolution 24-18. We did recommend that favorably with some amendments. We also had a presentation from Mr. Gutwald from Planning and Zoning on some upcoming developments in the city of Annapolis and the status of the residential developments. Our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, July 17th at 6 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Mr. City Attorney, next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda is comments by the general public.
Is there anyone present who would like to speak? Please come forward. We have no one signed up to speak. Okay. Seeing no motion in the chamber, I declare the comments by the general public closed. Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda is an update from the mayor.
Okay, I don't have anything to say. I'm trying to keep it short. We broke some records last Monday, so let's break some records for a shortest meeting this Monday. I was really impressed with the active shooter drill that we did. It just shows you what a great team of people we have working for us in the city, and I think people don't realise what goes on behind the scenes that make this city such a special place. So I want to thank all our public safety people, some of you who are out there, thank you. That's it. Okay, Mr. City Attorney, next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The next item on the agenda is appointments, beginning with AP-7-18, the appointment of Albert G. Kirchner Jr. to the Audit Committee.
All right, is there a motion to appoint Albert G. Kirchner Jr. to the Audit Committee?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Could we take them as a group?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I move we take them as a group.
Second.
Okay, so let's do that again. Is there a motion to approve Albert G. Kirchner Jr., Jared Littman, Esquire, and Julie Marsack,
CPA.
CPA, MBA, and to the Audit Committee? Motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Discussion?
Mr.
Alderman Payan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All three of these individuals are thoroughly qualified for this position. They have volunteered their time. The only one I question at all is the second one, the guy that used to sit over. No, I'm only kidding. Only kidding. The joke would be a lot better if he were here tonight. But they're thoroughly qualified. They've all dealt with government expenditures and government budgets before. And I think that they will be an asset. I'm very grateful that they've each volunteered their time for this because, Mr. Mayor, the members of my committee and myself, we're going to work them. So I would ask that my colleagues approve each of these individuals. It would be a fine addition, I'm quite sure.
And Alderman Savage?
I just wanted to commend my colleague for getting an excellent group of people to nominate.
I'll ditto that. That's a blue ribbon committee there. Great job, Fred. Okay. All those in favour?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? Ayes have it. Okay.
That's good news.
Okay, Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda is the approval of the consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar include budget revision requests as follows. GT-19-18, transfer from city facility improvements, transfer to transportation oil and water separation replacement. GT-20-18, transfer from planning and zoning salaries and benefits, $75,000. Office environmental policy salaries and benefits, $125,000. DPW engineering and construction salaries and benefits, $40,000. DPW streets salaries and benefits, $30,000. DPW snow salaries and benefits, $20,000. Recreation and parks salaries, $32,000. Transfer to mayor's office salaries and benefits, $60,000. Public information office salaries and benefits, $2,000. Purchasing salaries and benefits, $20,000. MIT salaries and benefits, $80,000. Human resources salaries and benefits, $8,000. DPW administration salaries and benefits, $20,000. DPW traffic control salaries and benefits, $10,000. DPW buildings and salaries and benefits, $90,000. DPW fleet maintenance salaries and benefits, $20,000. Recreation and parks operating, $12,000. Sale of property, $3,100,000, and transfer to capital projects, $3,100,000. Business and miscellaneous items, City Council ratification of collective bargaining agreements, AFSCME 3406 and 3162, Police Union Local 400, and Fire Union Local 1926. And that completes the consent calendar items.
Are there any objections to items on the consent calendar? Alderman Arnett?
I thought we were removing the collective bargaining from the consent
I'm
calendar.
about to do that now, yep.
Okay.
Okay, City Manager Sutherland requests the removal of the City Council ratification of collective bargaining agreements. So that's off. Any objections? I would entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar as amended.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favour, Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Mayor Buckley?
Yes?
Alderman Rodriguez?
Yes.
Alderwoman Henson? Aye. Alderman Savage?
Aye.
Alderman Arnett?
Aye.
Alderwoman Tierney?
Aye.
Alderman Payon?
Aye.
Alderwoman Pendle Charles?
Aye.
Alderwoman Finlayson?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda is legislative actions on second readers, beginning with Ordinance O-18-18, Public Services, Title 16 Code Amendments, for the purpose of transferring the charges for water service from Chapter 16.08 of the Code of the City of Annapolis to the fees schedule, transferring the charges for sewer service from Chapter 16.16 of the Code of the City of Annapolis to the fees schedule, clarifying the council approval process for any rate increases determined to be necessary to cover the cost of water and sewer service, and matters generally relating to charges for water and sewer services.
So City Manager Sutherland, is there a motion to withdraw, has requested a motion to withdraw O-18-18 on second reader?
So moved. So moved.
Second, all those in favour, say aye.
Aye.
No discussion, sorry.
Well, I think the reason for removing it is pretty sound, but I would defer to the city manager to explain that.
So this ordinance is not necessary at all. There are provisions in the code that say what the water and sewer rates are and that they can be increased no more than 5% in any given year. Once we submit the water and sewer rate study to you, which we've done, the rates are proposed to go up only 2.5% next year. So there's no reason to have an ordinance to set the water and sewer rates.
All those in favour of withdrawing? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it, okay. Madam City Clerk, please call the roll. Oh, we've done that? Okay, sorry. Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda is Resolution R-22-18, Watershed Restoration Fund, Appropriation and Use, for the purpose of reaffirming the commitment of the City Council concerning the appropriation and use of monies in the Watershed Restoration Fund.
Is there a motion to adopt R-22-18 on second reader?
So moved.
Second.
Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Buckley?
Yes?
Alderman Rodriguez?
Aye.
Alderwoman Henson? Aye. Alderman Savage?
Aye.
Alderman Arnett?
Aye.
Alderwoman Tierney?
Aye.
Alderman Payon?
Aye.
Alderwoman Pendle Charles?
Aye.
Alderwoman Finlayson?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda is Resolution R-24-18, Equal Protection Task Force, African American Residents, for the purpose of establishing a temporary advisory task force commissioned to provide the mayor and city council with a public forum for studying and preparing reports about the issues of African American residents of the city of Annapolis and matters generally relating to said task force.
Is there a motion to adopt R-24-18 on second reader?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Proposed amendments, R-24-18 Housing and Human Welfare Committee amendments. Alderman Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks for clarifying that for me.
The Housing and Human Welfare Committee did have the opportunity to review R-2418. The only amendment that we proposed was having the city's African American liaison be one of the task force members. And so we did make an amendment there to include that position being as part of the task force. That was the only amendment.
Alderwoman Pendle-Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One question, Alderwoman Henson. Are you referring to Mr. Ajayi?
That's correct.
I think his title is African American Community Services Specialist.
Thank you.
Okay.
Then I would move to amend that, amend the amendment to have it say, thank you very much, African American Community Services Specialist. Thank you.
Let me get it right.
Thank you.
Let me look it up.
Okay, is there a motion to amend R-24-18 on second reader?
To African American Community Services Specialist.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favour say aye.
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 Those opposed? All right. Is there a motion to adopt R-24-18 as amended on second reader?
So moved.
Second.
Madam City Clerk, please call the roll.
Yes, sir. Mayor Buckley?
Aye.
Alderman Rodriguez?
Aye.
Alderwoman Henson?
Aye.
Alderman Savage?
Aye.
Alderman Arnett? Alderwoman Tierney?
Aye.
Alderman Payan?
Aye.
Alderwoman Pendle-Charles?
Aye.
Alderwoman Phillips?
Aye.
Motion passes. Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda is Resolution R-29-18, extension of deadline for submission of proposed union agreements for the purpose of postponing until Monday, July 9, 2018, the submission to the mayor of proposed memoranda of understanding between employee organizations and the city of Annapolis.
Mr. City Manager Sutherland and Steve Silvestri, please come forward.
So moved.
I'll second the resolution.
Good evening. How you doing?
So, Resolution 2918 that's before you will extend until Monday, July 9th, the submission of the actual memorandums of understanding. Those are the signed union contracts. As you know, as we've said, we just finished police, we finished fire earlier today. We don't have clean, pretty signed contracts to submit to you tonight. We will go over what we agreed to for all four unions, but the actual submission of the memorandums of understanding will happen on July 9th. So I'm going to start with AFSCME first. And
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question
Sure.
before we begin? Mrs. Sutherland, would you tell us what the process is? Who's on the bargaining team, the management team, and so forth? What is our process? And I know it speaks to when bargaining should be completed in the code, but I think there needs to be some clarification as to how this all came about.
okay. So I'm actually going to let Ms. Hopkins do that because I came in on the tail end of this.
Mhm.
The city manager is on management's bargaining team for all of the unions. So Mr. Andrews was on it, prior to my arrival. Then Chief Stokes was on it as the acting city manager. And he was also on the fire one as the fire chief, but he was on these other union negotiations as well as the acting city manager. So I'm going to let Tricia talk about the process from the beginning because I wasn't here.
Thank you.
All right. Essentially, what begins our collective bargaining process is that in October, we have to establish a meeting that we're going to enter into negotiations. Typically, what happens in the city, though, is until you have your budget and you know what you're going to be able to bargain with, you don't really get underway very in any depth. So we really get back together after the first of the year, after the first of the calendar year. We reconvened in February. We met with each of the different bargaining units. The management team is pretty consistent. It's human resources, along with the city manager. The city manager already mentioned human resources, a representative from the Office of Law, and that's been Carrie Berger this year, and the finance director is not necessarily a standard member, but will come in as needed during that collective bargaining process. The unions will bring their council representatives or whoever is their chief negotiator, along with the president or the chief job steward of their bargaining group, and also other members of the bargaining team that they have determined is going to be. In the case of ASME, they bring their Council 67 rep and their union presidents. That's our team.
Some years ago, I had proposed that bargaining be completed by, I think it was the 1st of February, so that there would be an opportunity for whatever was bargained to be included in the mayor's budget presentation. And we've not been able to live up to that.
Yeah.
But I do believe that Mrs. Sutherland was able to include in the budget this year what was expected as far as the cost for bargaining. Am I correct?
You are correct. You had $938,000 set aside in a reserve for all, not just the unions, also the non-represented employees, but whatever cost of living, whatever costs there were to the union negotiations. So we have covered the costs of everything we're going to present to you is all within the budget that you have adopted.
And I believe the agreements are 4-year agreements?
They are 4-year agreements. So next year, you'll have them in plenty of time. Yeah, we don't have to do this for 4 years.
Well, I guess the question is, did you share with us the projected cost for those
Yes.
agreements in the out years?
Yes, so Melissa gave you a handout first thing this evening. It says fiscal impact note at the top, and it has all 4 years, the cost of all 4 years.
Okay, and I think you shared some of this with us at a previous meeting. Thank
Yes.
you.
Alderman Arnett?
Thank you. Are there any openers in the agreements, or is this it for 4 years?
There are no reopeners in these agreements. So what we have settled on is what we will have in place for 4 years.
Thank you.
Gavin? Hi.
Alderman Tierney? Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just bear with me for a second. So per the code 3.32.110, it says the City Council may not vote on the ratification of any collective bargaining agreement between the City of Annapolis and any labor union until the Director of Finance has prepared and submitted to the City Council a fiscal impact note addressing, at a minimum, the annual cost of the contract to the city, the increase or decrease in cost compared to the current or preceding contract, and how the costs of the agreement are to be funded. So are we still going to be doing this yearly, even though it's a 4-year agreement?
No.
Isn't there some risk there?
No, we're going to present this to you now with
Okay.
our projections of the 4-year cost. Next year, when you get the budget, those costs will be built into the budget that's submitted to you.
Okay, do we have to amend the code or anything, or are we okay? I guess we're okay, I don't know.
I think you're fine.
Okay.
So, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to cover the ASME?
Yeah, so, we're gonna start, just wait. We're gonna start with AFSMI, both of the AFSMIs. What do you have?
I have their best and finals that they signed off on.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna start with your fiscal impact note, because I think it really tells you everything you need to know. We'll go over
Teresa?
these provisions.
1 second.
I just want to ask a question for clarification. At this point, we are in the process of voting on R29,
Oh, okay.
yeah, and
Well,
we,
then-
we have a second, and where it's time for a roll
Yep.
call before you get to the union negotiations, if that's okay.
Roll call. You want a roll call?
Mayor Buckley,
Aye.
Alderman Rodriguez,
Aye.
Alderwoman Henson. Aye. Alderman Savage,
Aye.
Alderman Arnett.
Aye.
Alderwoman Tierney,
Aye.
Alderman Payon,
Aye.
Alderwoman Pendle Charles.
Aye.
Alderwoman Finlayson.
Aye.
Ayes have it.
I gotta read the next thing on the agenda is what they're speaking of.
Okay, Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The next item on the agenda. Yeah. The next item on the agenda is a business and miscellaneous item removed from the consent calendar, beginning with the city council ratification of collective bargaining agreements, AFSCME 3406 and 3162, Police Union Local 400, and Fire Union Local 1926.
Okay, thanks, Teresa. Continue.
Okay, so there are two AFSCME unions. AFSCME 3162 is our clerical and technical union, and AFSCME 3406 is our labor and trades union. The agreements for both of them are very similar, so I'm going to cover them together. Both have agreed to a 4-year contract with cost of living increases that are 2% in fiscal 19, 2% in fiscal 20, 3% in fiscal 21, and 3% in fiscal 22. There is a step increase that already exists on the scale, a longevity step, which we are increasing the longevity step from 2.5% to 5.361%. Both agreed to a change in the number of hours required before they get acting out of class pay, if they're filling in for someone in a higher position. We agreed that we would form a committee to study non-competitive advancement. So if you have, for example, a maintenance worker 1, 2, 3, and what it takes to get from a 1 to a 2 is just skills and experience, that you would be able to progress through those ranks in a non-competitive fashion when you had the appropriate level of skills, but we're going to study how to do that. We changed funeral leave from being 3 consecutive days to just 3 days. And we've added stepmother, stepfather, stepchild to the definition of family. For the labor and trades union, we have added a provision on standby pay only if the department director says they have to be on standby. So when you know Hurricane Isabel's coming, don't leave town, you need to be on standby. They're going to get 3 hours every day that they're on standby unless they're called in, and then they actually get their rate of pay when they're called in.
Or
Call-in pay. On health and welfare benefits, we have a change in the 3rd year of the contract. Starting July 1st, 2020, the cost share for health insurance will go from an 80% contribution by the employer, 20% by the employee, to a 75-25 split. In any year that the health insurance fund has a fund balance of more than 10%, we're going to provide a premium holiday to both the employer, the employees, and the retirees, everybody who's in it, in proportion to their cost shares. We have agreed on the trades union to pay for their cost of their commercial driver licenses renewal and physical exam that are requirements of their job. For the physical exam, they have to go to our medical provider. If they go to their own, they're paying for it. And it's a 4-year contract. So Melissa has put together, and two other things that are very important. One is, in both contracts, we have eliminated the Me Too clause. So each of these unions had a clause in their contract that said they get whatever COLA the higher of police or fire get. So we were able to negotiate with them to remove that Me Too clause going forward. But we have added an evergreen clause which says if we don't notify them or they don't notify us 6 months before the contract is up that we're renegotiating, then it would carry forward into the next year. So that's where we are in both of the AFSCME unions. Melissa has prepared a fiscal note, and you'll see it has a column for FY19, 20, 21, and 22. You can see the costs of the COLA, the cost of the STEP, the cost to pay for the CDL renewal, the savings from the health insurance, and then the subtotals of those for both of those unions.
Finlayson?
Thank you. On the surface, it may sound as if we've given up a lot. Can you tell us about the equity here? I know going from 80 to 75 is a big deal.
So going from 80 to 75 is actually a 25% increase in the amount the employee will pay, which is, depending how much the employee makes, it's roughly 3% of pay to cover that. So that is a significant increase, changing the cost share and how it affects the employees, which is why in this particular contract you see a greater cost of living increase in year 3 and 4 than you do in year 1 and 2, because we're going to make them pay more for their health insurance.
Okay. So it probably balances out, would you say?
Well, no, the impact's here.
Well, I mean, the impact is here, but you don't have the impact on the employees.
Oh, correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry, I misunderstood your question.
Thank you.
Alderman Henson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to make sure I understand the compensation enhancements or increases correctly. It's the cost of living, it's the STEP, and then the longevity increase. Is that a third form of increasing, or is that the same thing as the STEP?
The step 11 step is the longevity.
The years that it references, 7, 12, and 15, what does that represent?
What are you looking at? Okay, but I don't want to know what document she's looking at.
It's the paragraph, section.
Is this what I sent you this afternoon?
Yes, it's also in the one that's attached as well. It says the establishment and payment of longevity increases for 7 years, and it goes through 1988 for 12 years and 1989 for 15 years, will not affect the normal. I just want to understand that provision more.
It's on page 28 of the CBA, Local 3162.
So what?
Page 28 of what?
Okay, so the employees get placed on the salary scale and they move up a step each year that they have successful performance until they get to year 7. And then they don't get another increase until year 12. And then they don't get another increase until year 15. So those increases at year 12 and at year 15 are considered to be longevity increases.
So when it says that it would not affect that schedule, does that mean that at year 8 you would no longer get the step increase, or what does that mean?
No, that didn't change. The only thing that changed is the step increase, which is step 11 at year 20. At year 20 is going from 2.5% to 5.361. That's the only change in the salary scale or the steps.
So just so that I understand that provision, absent any changes, what it was before and what it is now, is it saying that after 7 years, when you're in year 8, what happens with your step?
You don't get one.
And you don't get one again until year 11?
Year 12.
12. And then this does not alter that?
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the AFSCME contracts?
Yeah, sorry.
Alderman Tierney?
The workman's compensation is per state law, but then the city, I just want to understand city impact, so the city will still kick in the difference to their prior wage of 100%?
So we were doing the 100% pay through payroll for the police and fire unions. AFSCME was never getting 100%. They were always limited to the 66 2/3. So we don't have any significant savings on workers' comp. We need to run that through, whether it's being paid out of the self-insurance fund or through payroll, but we never had that disconnect that we had on police and fire where they were getting 100% through payroll. So you will see on police and fire that we have savings because we're going to modify how we're doing that. So there is savings on the police and fire contracts as a result of that, but not on AFSCME.
So, just so I understand, with the state, I don't know how to ask this, why are we exceeding the state requirement or are we?
We are, and I can't tell you why.
Because
that's how the city of Annapolis has been doing it.
Okay.
And it's costing us money.
Yeah,
Yes.
just to be clear, it is costing us money above and beyond what what the state requires.
Correct.
So, okay, is that something we can look into, Finance Chair?
What?
Right.
Thanks.
I'm going to let Mr. Silvestri talk about fire and police.
Good evening, everybody. So you should have, so let's talk about fire first. So you should have 3 documents that are in place for fire. You should have a collective bargaining agreement with track changes and comments in it. You should have a letter, a draft letter regarding pension contribution, and you should have an Exhibit F to the contract, which is a new drop program that goes into effect this year. I guess you're handing those out now. Okay. Okay, great. All right, so generally speaking, I'm going to talk about what, on the global scale, are the changes in fire. So fire is was ratified today, meaning that we have a contract ratified with the fire union, subject to ratification by this body. The step from here is to take that track changes document, turn it into a clean document, and get everybody's signature on it. That's the only step we have to do with fire. There's no other steps that we need to go from here in terms of process. Negotiations were somewhat extended, largely because we had some difficulty grasping costs, and it was ratified today because the union's attorney and I had an exchange over the weekend and through last week to make sure we had language that correctly reflected the agreements we made in our committees. So let me take you through some of the points of that. So so if I go, I guess you have the contracts right in front of you?
No.
You don't have the
Of
contracts
course
at all?
not.
You don't have the, okay. All right. All right, so let me just go through it. So there's a 4-year agreement. And so as we talked about in our last session, the current step system is in place for all 4 of those agreements. So there's no change to the step system where we pay steps and longevity steps. There's an agreement with respect to COLAs and the fire. And the fire COLAs are 2%, 2%, 3%, 3% across the 4 years. If I'm going too fast, you can slow me down. There will be an amendment to the pension plan resulting from this agreement to add a multiplier or a 75% pension benefit at 30 years of service. So 75% pension benefit at 30 years of service. And that's a new feature in the plan. It was costed out and is also contained in that $900,000 cost number that the city manager mentioned. There's a military pay provision in the contract that's new that matches our current practice. So the current contract that expires next week had an outdated military pay practice. It wasn't paying the amounts that the city had been paying for all employees. Sorry, can you hear me now? That's good. So there's you see a military pay change in the track changes version of it that really comes current to what the city's paying. There's workers' compensation savings, which we talked about. So let me just add a word of this. There are a number of jurisdictions, municipalities in Maryland that have negotiated agreements with either police or fire that in effect pay the officers 100% of their pay when they get hurt in the line of duty. Our contract provisions are like that. The difference between us and some of the other municipalities is before this new contract, we were paying it out of general fund as opposed to taking the maximum allowed by state law and paying it as a workers' compensation payment, which would be tax-free to the employees and tax-free to us. So we don't have FICA FUTA to pay. If we take it out of pay, we have 7% FICA FUTA to report. So moving that 66 2/3 from a regular payroll payment to a workers' compensation insurance payment saves us 7% of that cost right off the top. Then we supplement that with 33 1/3 or whatever that number is that takes the employee from legal maximum up to 100% of straight time pay. No overtime pay, no excess pay, no premium pay. It's just the straight time pay. And that 33% is what the employee pays tax on and what we pay FICA FUTA on. So that's how the change is going to affect. So that has a savings of roughly about $20,000 a year just for fire. So there was a provision in the contract that provided for a varying degrees of bonus for firefighters who had ALS certification. We took that out of the contract. That's been negotiated out, so there's no bonus there. That's another $55,000 worth of savings. Then as the city manager reported, what we've done with the fire union is that we've eliminated the contribution the city makes to VEBA for unused vacation, annual vacation, and sick pay. And that's saved us another $55,000 a year. So going forward, there's no contribution to VEBA for unused leave. Then there's a health insurance savings that the city manager mentioned in connection with the ASME contracts that are applied here as well. So in fiscal year starting 2020, the percentage payroll payment that they make, it's a monthly contribution, goes from 20% to 25%, and roughly that's 3% of pay. So you were mentioning that that's a significant change. It is really a significant change. So the officers in the union are going to pay 3% of payroll for that, generally speaking, at the highest levels. So the individual rates will be lower, the parent and child rate might be lower, but the family rate will be close to 3% of payroll that they will have a hit on that we will not have to pay. So they'll be subsidizing us for that. So we've also made some changes just in the contract cosmetically or correctionally to correct the calculation of leave from days to from hours to days that kind of work through our payroll system. Excuse me, from days to hours, and you'll see that in the track changes. So we've also done in the fire agreement. We've allowed for comp time, so we've allowed for the firefighters to elect to take comp time instead of overtime. So we don't pay the overtime as a payroll payment. It's a comp time that can be used by the firefighter as permitted by the department from then on to capture additional time off at an overtime rate. So it does save us. We can't calculate it because you just don't know how much it's going to be, but there's some savings in connection with that. So I'm looking through my agreement now. So we've also We've also provided a small benefit for the first-year employees in the leave provision. So what we found, what the union asked us for and what we agreed to is that employees in the first year who are coming right out of the training academy do not get the opportunity to use all of their leave, their annual leave in the first year, because they're coming out of the training academy and the assignments are tight. So in the contract, what we've done is we've allowed for a little bit of an elevated carryover for those first-year employees so that they can not lose their leave automatically, because we're finding that the scheduling is making it very difficult with the training academy to get them to use all their leave. I don't think we've even calculated the cost of that. I don't think it's going to be that significant. And then looking to the change that I talked about in the pension plan, which is the 30-year the 75% at 30 years, is going to be in the pension plan document that you're going to see. Also in the pension plan document is going to be the reinstitution of a 20-year pension at 50%. So both unions, 20-year pension, 50%. Both unions have the 75% multiplier at 30 years of service. You will see both of those provisions in the pension plan. The third provision in the pension plan that you're going to see changed, that we talked about during collective bargaining, is that we're going to, right now the city has a current practice of, if you have a service-related disability, so if you've been judged to be disabled from work because of a service-related injury, so not a non-service, so a service-related in the line of duty injury, the city has a practice of also affording the person who enters that program, that disability benefit program, the option of picking a joint survivor option for benefits if it so happens that the person dies or when the officer dies. That wasn't in the plan. We talked about that with both unions, and now we will see it as part of the changes in the new pension plan that are going to, reinstated pension plan that are going to come in. Yeah.
Actually, it was in the plan. We just made sure that the section that it referred to related to disability was clear.
May I ask, so does that mean a surviving spouse is eligible?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then we've made a change also to the line disability definition of what it takes to qualify. So the current plan had individuals who were in line of service not qualify for pension benefit if they couldn't perform their job as a firefighter or a police officer, but also any other city employment. And it became kind of impossible to kind of even qualify somebody for disability retirement. So we removed the other city employment as a disqualifying factor, because most likely that other city employment is going to be at a much lower rate of pay. So the officer would be suffering a difference between the disability pension benefit and that rate of pay. So that's been removed as well. And I think that's it for fire. Oh, let me talk about drop. One more thing.
Alderman Annette, sir.
Drop. So
Before you do drop, can we go back to the pension?
Sure.
I'm looking at this language, it's on page 14. In the past, we had specified the split. Now we're silent on the city contribution.
Yes. So that's another document we need to talk about.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So let's talk about drop first. So there are now 2 drop programs in existence for both of these unions. The first drop program is the program that's currently in effect, which is a 3-year drop program where the officer or firefighter pays 8% into it up to 25 years of service, and then the 8% drops off. And there are certain return percentages that they get on the money that we otherwise would put into the drop account. So the way drop works is somebody signals that they're going to retire, that they're going to accept drop, so they stay employed for 3 years. They earn their money for 3 years, but their pension benefit gets paid that would have been paid to them had they started the pension at the entry into drop, gets paid into a separate account and gets an interest assumption in terms of crediting. So through the actuaries that we had, we figured out that drop program with the 14, I think, participating people would cost us around $40,000 per person. So it was not cost neutral. So what we did with both police and fire unions are that we negotiated a new drop program going forward based upon our actuary's advice as to what would be cost neutral. So the features of the new drop program going forward is instead of a 3-year drop period, there's a 4-year drop period. So you have to stay in for 4 years, not 3 years. There's a lowering of the interest percentage from 8% to 4%, but instead of capping it at 25 years of service, the officer or the firefighter in drop has to pay that 4% for all 4 years. There's no exemption. And then we lowered the interest rate payable from a floating interest rate that's tied to some market rate to 3.25%. So that interest rate is lowered. And those combination of factors allows the actuary to conclude that this program is going to be cost neutral. So we'll take another look at it at 3 years, like the legislation that currently is in place has, to see if that is in fact been true. And if it's not true, then we'll make whatever further adjustments we can make in 3 years in connection with drop, or we'll talk to the union about it at that point in time. So the last document that you have for fire is a letter. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. So, looking at the drop language, because one of the problems the last time, besides not being cost neutral, was it wasn't clear what happened once it was determined not to be cost neutral. Here I'm reading, no new participants shall be enrolled until such time as parties agree to implement changes necessary.
That's existing language. That hasn't changed.
Okay.
That was a language in the prior drop program.
Well, we had determined we weren't cost neutral and people were added. I think at least one person from fires, my understanding, were added to the program. I want to,
yeah, I don't know
because this says it's going to be, the neutrality is going to be calculated every 3 years.
That's what the existing program is.
And that's staying the same.
It's not changing.
And I believe it's only been in existence for 3 years.
Pardon
So
me?
this is your first analysis at the end of 3 years. That analysis showed it wasn't cost neutral. So just like it says, we negotiated with the union, fire and police unions, to make it cost neutral. We were able to reach agreement by adjusting the drop. If we hadn't been able to reach agreement on that, then we wouldn't be able to allow anybody to enroll.
I thought we knew at least a year ago that the drop program was not cost neutral.
Does that not say a 3-year evaluation?
Pardon me?
Doesn't that say you evaluated at the end of 3 years?
Right.
This is 3 years.
Let me see if I can
Yeah.
help you. So last year, we sat in this chamber, and we had a actuary, Chiron, that presented a report on drop. That report was equivocal. It didn't definitively say that drop was cost neutral. It had a whole bunch of assumptions that we were required to make to determine whether or not we had, the actuary could even calculate cost neutrality.
Right.
So every time I read that report, I have to go back and have a drink and read it again, because it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I'm not trying to be critical of Chiron, it's a tough thing. So this year, so now moving forward to this spring, we engaged another actuary, so we replaced the actuary, engaged another actuary, Boomershine, and we asked them to conduct a drop summary analysis and a cost analysis, and we got a definitive cost analysis, and that's where we came up with $41,000. So that wasn't in place last year.
Okay.
It wasn't agreed upon last year. And I'll add another point. The fact that our actuary says it's not neutral doesn't end the discussion. There's a discussion that we have to have with the representatives of the employees, because it's their pension plan and it's a term and condition of employment. So we have to reach an agreement on what cost neutrality is or isn't. And we have to have a debate for that, because they have a right to say, they have their say on what they believe neutrality is or shouldn't be. So we did that, and that conversation, that negotiation resulted in this drop. Okay.
All right.
So I'm going to move forward to the last document, which is a short letter. So what we decided to do, both the pension plan and the collective bargaining agreements heretofore had specific rate, payroll rate provisions for the city's contribution to the pension plan. And a little bit of the history in connection with that. There was a period of time when the city either didn't make a contribution to the pension plan or made a small contribution to the pension plan. And both unions were worried about the stability of the pension plan were they not for a specific agreement with respect to what was paid in. So you will see in the track changes versions of these contracts that down through the years, they ramped up the payment to the 18% that it currently is. So the city manager at this point in time has, for the next year, has submitted in her budget that we would pay what the actuaries require, or the actuaries' calculation recommendation of what we pay in as a percentage. So instead of putting in an agreement a provision that we really can't tell what the percentage is going to be the next year, or the year after that, or the year after that, what we said to the unions is we will endeavor to put in to the pension plan what the actuaries recommend. There are provisions in the agreements that say that if we can't make that payment, then we have to come before you to explain why that is. So there'll be a discussion process with the bargaining representatives in connection with that as well. And so we're happy to be able to make that required contribution, what the actuaries required this year. Hopefully it'll be stable, but again, we're looking at the pension plan in a lot of different ways that you might recognize from having heard the Boomershine people earlier this year about the assumptions that we're using as part of that plan.
But
Alderman Arnett?
what happens, it's on page 14, city manager determines that we can't make the contribution as required by the actuary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any provision about us going back and making that up at some later time.
No, there isn't any retro, there's no retro payment in connection with that. And so I think one of the things we're realizing is that we really haven't been making a required contribution down through the years. So we're paying forward the debt, so to speak. When I say the debt, I mean we're not matching what the actuaries would require us to pay. And so eventually there's a consequence of that. The plan is pretty well funded right now. It's not in danger. It's pretty well funded, but everybody looks at it, I think, on a yearly basis in a very cautionary way. So that's something that we should be watching.
Yeah,
how much we
because
pay in.
it can get very less funded if we change any of the assumptions.
Right.
And we saw when those years when we didn't make the payments, we went from, I think it was 126% funded down to about 87% funded.
Right.
I mean, if this is what the unions want, that's fine, but I would have thought there should have been some kind of a discussion about how the city would get caught back up.
The way the city gets caught back up is the actuary considers the fact that you didn't make your contribution, so your liability, instead of being X, is now Y.
Right.
And then the actuary makes a recommendation of how much you need to put in to fund Y. So it figures into the actuarial calculation if you don't make your
And Y can
contribution.
become Z and it can get bigger and bigger.
Exactly.
Can be. And so one of the other changes that we made in the pension plan structure this year that we discussed with both police and fire is that, so right now, there's a retirement plan commission that essentially oversees the fund. And there's only one representative of both unions. So now what we've done, what you'll see going forward, is that each union is entitled, and that person, I think, is not even selected by the unions. I think he's selected by the mayor, if I'm not mistaken, but I may be wrong about that.
Are you talking about Joe Simo?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So now what we're gonna have in that commission is there'll be, in addition to the officials, the ex officio members from the city, there'll be a representative of each union, the police and the fire union, selected by the police and fire union to be on that commission. So the unions will be more vested in, pardon the pun, in the operation of the pension plan. They will have more direct knowledge of the operation of the pension plan because their representatives will be at the commission meetings. And I think that will work out much better for how we manage the plan.
Right, so once Dan Grimes left, we only had chief of police and chief of fire. So what you're saying is now we will have two pension members from rank and file.
Designated from the union. Yes.
Will the chiefs stay on? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
We're not contracting the commission, we're just adding.
I think they both volunteered to not stay on, but.
Yeah, well, we're volunteering them, or their representatives. Yeah, we're doing that. So that's the fire agreement. Does anybody have any questions?
Alderman Rodriguez?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for this incredible effort. I can only imagine what this took, so congratulations for that. I think it's related to Alderman Arnett's question. I just want to be clear on this, that within the agreement, within the contract now, based on what the actuarial determination be to fund is what's going to be required per contract for the city to fund, correct?
No.
No.
That's not in the contract.
Okay.
So you have a document called the side letter that runs with the contract.
Yeah.
And the side letter contains the commitment of the city to deal with the pension.
Okay.
It's not in the contract, it's in the side letter.
Got it. So in the case, because I'm all about, I definitely support funding at the level we should be funding it, but in the situation where, given extraneous circumstances, 1 year the council during the budget decides to fund less or more, are we restricted in that?
We're not, but there's a provision in the contract that gets picked up when, for example, the city manager comes to you and says, well, I know we have to pay 20%, but this year I only want to pay 15%.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, thank you.
Alderman Henson?
I just want to make sure I understand that correctly. It sounds like what that provision does is takes the discretion from the council invested in the city manager if we want to make the actuarially determined contribution. Is it saying that we will only not make that if the city manager determines that we cannot make that? Or does it give the that's what it sounds like to me.
No. So the full provision says that if the city manager determines that that's not going to happen, she has to come before you. So you have a review of that.
Is there anything that starts that analysis from the council, or is that only started from the city manager? Should the city manager determine we cannot, then the city manager brings that to the council. If the council wanted flexibility in any given year and to contribute more or less, is there anything that starts that from the budget?
Not in the collective bargaining agreement, and I would think that, and I don't know the structure, so I'm not going to be able to answer that question fully, but I would think that at some point in time there's a report, whether it's in the budget process or some other point in time of year, there's a report to the council about the operation of the pension plan and the finances of the pension plan. So I have to believe there's an opportunity outside of the collective bargaining context for the city to review the current status of its pension plan, whether it's a report by the plan commission or an annual report. So we know that the actuary prepares an annual actuarial evaluation that's put in front of the council. We know that they prepare a GASB that's put in front of the council, so the council has access to the financial information regarding the plan on a year-over-year basis. So the answer to your question is, I believe that there's an opportunity to review the current status of the plan, and with those reports come the actuary's determination of what the next year's contribution should be. So that's part of the report.
Thank you.
I hope I answered your question. Yeah.
I want to.
During the budget process, I'm going to be recommending in the budget, in the mayor's proposed budget, I'm going to recommend to the mayor's going to propose a budget. It's going to have a contribution to the pension plan. It's saying that management is committed to fully funding the pension plan. It is always your choice to decide the appropriation. But if in my recommendation, I think, for whatever reason we can't afford to make the contribution in full, I have to report that to you so that there is a discussion about it. Appropriation authority always remains in your hands.
So this does not, I just got it today, so forgive me, I'm looking for the shalls and the wills and all those things that are obligatory. So this would not require us to have the actuarially determined contribution be the contribution. We still have the flexibility to change that as a body, should we choose to?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Alderman Arnett?
So, can I make a request of city manager or the appropriate person that these documents get to Joe Sumo and Kathy Sulik, because these will have impacts on the pension plan and investment discussions. And they've always been surprised to learn after the fact that we've made changes, so we ought to let them know it more or less the same time we're finding out about it.
Alderman Finlayson?
Yes, thank you. The chair of the Finance Committee sits on the Police and Fire Pension Board. And so maybe we can incorporate that into the Finance Committee agenda, so that maybe on a quarterly basis, we get an update on
Sure.
the status of
Right.
the pension fund. So, thank you.
Okay, so.
Only if the two chiefs come to that finance committee.
Alderwoman Henson.
May I just ask one more question?
Mhm.
I was looking in one of the, and I think the title on it was Local 3406, Council 67, so I'm not sure which one that correlates to, but it had provisions in there about meals being reimbursed at $3.50 for each meal. It was the section that was speaking about the lunch break. Is that a part of our police and fire contracts as well?
No.
No, that's the AFSCME contract.
And so those are for, and I'm sorry, it was for trades and maintenance is what that provision, and that's solely for that contract?
Yes.
And then I just want to understand correctly, I think it was said that the COLA was 2%, it is 2.5% for the first 2 years, and then 3% thereafter for this contract, for fire?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I said 2, it's 2.5.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
Alderwoman Tierney.
The increase in COLA, the 2.5, 3, is there some correlation with the CPI, or how is that? How are those?
There is a correlation to the CPI. So the CPI for this area generally runs between 2.5% and 3%. And has been running at 2.5% to 3%. In addition, locally, in the municipalities, the COLAs, if you will, are running from 2.5% to 3% in a lot of the municipalities. There's beginning to be a market squeeze, as we talked about earlier, not just for police, but also for fire. So we're going to expect upward pressure and mobility from our members. So, you know, they have families, and they will migrate as long as their pension, as long as they can still make their pension in a way. They'll migrate from our jurisdiction to other jurisdictions, mainly the counties, because counties have more money, and they're starting to spend more money on public safety. So these raises that are in here certainly are not exceeding CPI. They're in line with CPI, and we expect the CPI to go higher because of the upward pressure on wages and costs. I would expect those to go higher in the next 4 years. It's tough to predict what they're going to be for 4 years, but generally speaking, given the market now and given that there's going to be inflation, we're seeing that some of that, given that we have almost no unemployment in the region, so we're down to 4 to 5% unemployment, which is we don't have a cadre of unemployed residents or workers. When you get that low, all you're doing is you're tracking the transient employees that are going from job to job. You're just moving the vacancies. You're not generating any additional market for people to come and join the city's workforce. So it becomes difficult, particularly police and fire.
Alderwoman Finlayson.
Can you tell us since the county is one of our largest competitors, what they are offering?
So I don't have the exact numbers for fire, but police just recently negotiated an increase to their wage grids. I think the number was close to a $15,000.
What the police department did is they increased the entry-level pay. They essentially removed a whole rank of service and moved their entry-level pay up to what was equivalent to their officer first class. And over a 2-year period of time, they're going to be about a $9,000 increase in pay for the entry-level rank.
And on top of that, did they not also get a percentage for everyone else?
They had COLAs as well.
Yes.
Yes. So do we know what their COLA?
Don't know exactly.
I don't know what their COLA is. I believe fire's COLA is 3.
Yeah.
They have a
that number
2-year
is-
agreement, and I think
It's
it's...
going to be around 3%. I mean, I don't have it exactly. We can always get that for you, but it's not going to be in the 2s. The county is aggressively moving to capture quality candidates and to keep the candidates, that keep the officers that they have.
The
So-
police officers also have a sign-on bonus, a substantial sign-on bonus.
So
That's
laterals.
20,000 if I read it in the paper correctly.
Yep. So we can't, obviously can't compete with that, so one of the other considerations we have both for police and fire is to make sure that we are giving certainly no less than what we think the market bears in terms of COLAs, knowing that we still are gonna be behind when we get to that point, because of just the way they're recruiting right now. It'd be nice to be somebody who wants to go into police and fire, because you do end up getting value right now for your commitment to the departments.
Thank you.
Move to move to police? No, okay.
Alderman Arnett?
It's okay.
I'm looking at page 18 and 19.
All right, hold on a minute.
Yeah, I'm seeing there's some changes in the way we're doing administrative group and annual holiday pay, but I'm not sure I quite understand.
18 and 19, let me just,
Yeah,
sorry.
for 6 months of service but less than 10 years, 15 days, earned at a rate of 4.6154, which is a change from previous, and then for others, it's 6.4615, and then it goes to 73846, and so on.
Oh, okay. I think I gave that a gloss over when we talked, but Ms. Hopkins can explain that.
Alderman Arnett, what we tried to do is, we don't really calculate leave on a monthly basis, we calculate it on a biweekly pay period. So we just tried to make it consistent with what we do administratively. It does not change the rate, it's just a calculation to show that we're doing it on a biweekly basis.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then there's other, as we go further along, but I don't know, how are we going to deal with time to look at the red line and understand or ask questions about, like I see 29, there's education leave, and then there's 31, looks like a lot of changes, which I
So
don't know.
are you talking about the pages?
Yeah,
Okay.
in the
Sorry.
contract.
Mr. Arnett, that's one of the reasons you just passed Resolution 2918,
Okay, that's what I needed to know. Thank you.
July 9th.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Right. So actually, these are in the shape they should be in for you to look at them, because if we went right to the clean copies, signed versions of the contracts, you wouldn't know where the changes are. You'd have
Right.
to sit there and compare them side by side. So these track changes versions are really good for that. And you also see some of my comments. Unfortunately, the comments were really to the union's chief negotiator, but you see my comments back to him over the weekend about the back and forth we were having about some of these issues. But that's okay, that's all in the process.
Right.
Are they not? Okay, fine, that's good that they're not in there. I'm glad you don't have them. I notice
Right.
now you don't have them.
I'm glad we don't
That's
do it.
even better that you don't have them.
Oh.
I was polite.
Alderman Tierney?
Actually, what are you red or purple, or does that, is that
Well,
what you're talking
probably a
about?
combination of both.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Okay.
So these are, so understand the process for this. So we have these committees, the union has its committee, we have our committee. We start off with different proposals, sometimes conceptual, like we want more vacation, that's conceptual. Sometimes it's actual, so you have the actual contract and they write in and attract changes, this is what we want. So when it comes down to an agreement, then we have to convert whatever proposals we've tentatively agreed to actually convert it into the contract. And then we have to review it to make sure that we accurately caught what we changed. So there's a couple of layers of that. So there's my layer when I actually draft it. Then there's Trish, Ms. Hopkins, and city manager and the finance director all review it to make sure that they understand it and they have it. So they put their comments on that or edits. And then we send it to the union. So then the union's committee or the union's council, they have their chance at going through this. This is before you get a document to see. And usually when the union people go through it, then they put that document into ratification. So that's what occurred this past week or even today. Those documents that you're seeing, those track changes documents, were actually made available to the members, or a summary there, and the members voted on those and ratified those agreements. So this process, depending upon what kind of changes, I mean, some contracts you're only changing economics, other contracts like this, you're changing different parts of the contracts and language, you're putting new language in. So you have to be very careful that everybody has a consensus about exactly what words you're using. And that's the process that we had right now. Okay, police?
On fire, I see general order changes on police. Were there general order changes in fire?
No.
Okay.
No. Ready?
Yep,
okay.
please.
So now police, you should have 4 documents. And I will go through each one of them. So 2 of the documents are exactly the same as fire. So there's a drop exhibit that's exactly the same. They have the exact same new drop provision as fire does. I don't think we need to discuss that. The pension contribution letter, exactly the same as fire. We don't need to discuss that, we just discussed that. So they're, unlike fire, because we were very late in connection with the negotiation and final ratification of the police agreement, what we have is what I'll call a last, best, and final proposal. Actually, it's 5 documents you should have. So last, best, and final proposal. That was the city's last, best, and final that we then revised. They have that. So that we then revised on Friday to deal with issues that arose when the police union discussed that and voted on it earlier on Friday. So we made some changes on Friday that I can talk to you about. And then the last document you should have is a GO that talks about take-home vehicles. So everybody should have all those. So my process here is to go through first the last, best, and final proposal, and then the amendments to that last, best, and final proposal, and then talk about the take-home vehicles, unless anybody wants a different process. We okay with that? Okay. So last, best, and final proposal, 4 years, like the rest of the contracts. There's a take-home car program that is part of the contract in a separate GO. We'll talk about that. We'll defer talking about that. Wages, they have the current scale that they have always had. They maintain that for 4 years. And then cost of living increases. So we originally proposed 0%, which the reason for that was that we were implementing the take-home car program in the first year. 1%, 1.5%, and 2%. So we were downsizing, if you will, lowering the COLAs for the police to pay for the take-home cars. So we were using those COLAs to pay in part for take-home cars. That's changed now. The final agreement that we have that's been ratified is 2% of COLA, 0 in the second year, 1.5 in the third year, and 2 in the fourth year. And the reason for that is that we moved money to the first year of the agreement in a COLA, and we moved the implementation of the take-home car program from a full 100% first year take-home car program to 50% in the second year and 50% in the third year. So we spread the cost of the take-home program out in the final ratification that was done by the union. Does everybody understand that? So we moved away from this, and you should see an email. There should be an email from me to Mr. Lee, who's the bargaining agent for the local 400, UFCW local 400 on Friday, saying here's our change, and my understanding is that was voted on today and ratified. So that change moves the take-home car program from the first year implementation to the second and third year, and it moves the money from what you see here, 0, 1, 1.5, 2, to 2%, 0, 1.5, and 2. And yes.
Alderman Henson.
I want to make sure I understand that correct. If 50% of the cars are used for take-home in year 2,
so
no.
When we get to the take-home program, I'll go into weeds on this, but let me give you the short answer. So right now, there are a number of officers that have take-home car vehicles. and the city provides take-home car vehicles for them. Generally speaking, there are restrictions, but they're not really in a form that is even a GO. So the people who have, the officers who have take-home cars, the command staff has take-home cars, and they're officers. They're specially assigned officers like CID or specially assigned that have their take-home cars because they get called in at any point in time, so they have take-home vehicles. There's also a pilot program that's been in existence for years that has about 6 or 7, I think it's 6 vehicles in the pilot take-home car program. And then finally, every officer who lives in the city of Annapolis, who actually is a resident of the city of Annapolis, and there are a few of them, have their take-home cars. So there's a number of people in the force that already have take-home vehicles. So what the GO does is that it takes the people who don't have take-home car vehicles and provides them with take-home car vehicles. So it's not, we're providing everybody now all of a sudden with a take-home car vehicle. It's only those people who heretofore didn't have take-home vehicles. And those people generally, and I'm making a generalization now, those people generally are the patrol people, the people who patrol our streets, who work in the communities, so very important members of the police force that don't have take-home cars. So the program is really going to benefit them. So I'll get through the weeds when we go through the GO. You'll see exactly, these GOs are, how do I put this, very much in the weeds about where they can take their vehicles, who they can be in, who can be in the vehicles, what the expense is, what compensation the city gets for it. All that is in the GO.
My question, I might be oversimplifying it in my thinking, but what it sounded like to me was that the year 2, we would have 50% of the take-home cars, the program operated. If 50% of the cars are take-home, then I was trying to understand how logistically we would still have enough cars that were not take-home for those officers that were sharing a car to still share a car.
So we're not reducing anything. So let's say, and I think the number's 41, it may have changed, but there's 41 people who need take-home cars. We're not changing the rules for anybody else who already has a take-home car. So in the second year, we're gonna buy 20. In the third year, we'll buy 21. Or if there's 42, we'll buy 21 in the second year and 21 in the third year, buy or lease. So that's the 50% that I'm talking about, okay?
Thank you.
All right. So going through the memorandum, so this memorandum agreement was reached by the committees and voted upon by the members. So there's a medical insurance premium increase, like there is in fire, like there is in AFSCME. The pension issues, there's a 20% pension at 50% multiplier. There are, there's drop, so we've already been through that. And there's a change in the police pension with respect to the buyback of prior time with the city after break in service. So if somebody works for the city, leaves, and then comes back, there's a way for them to recapture their time. What we did was we moved that provision to require the officer to pay for his or her time at retirement at full actuarial cost. So the city is not being charged anything for that buyback. So we're not subsidizing the buyback of time. It's a no-cost provision for us. So you'll see that in the pension plan as well. And then you'll see service-related disability pension, joint and survivor benefits. We talked about that earlier. Military service leave with pay, we talked about that earlier. Workers' compensation change, that's part of the police agreement. The VIVA elimination, the VIVA payment elimination is there. So then there's a large event planning provision which pays premium pay for officers who don't have their, when we have an event, if we have to schedule officers not on their regular scheduled day, we pay them premium pay for that event. So this language brings that in. It has the qualifying factors. We're providing a field training payment for officers who field train people out of the academy. There's an asset payment, small payment for asset. There's a small payment for CID on call, so the on-call procedure has changed. There's an increase of comp time they already have to 120 hours. promotional process, there's a GO that is attached on promotional process. Largely, it's procedural changes, it's not substantive changes. So we made those provisions as part of the MOU. Anybody have any questions about that before we move to the other documents? All right.
So we need,
One minute.
Okay.
so we need to combine this best and final with the email to get the.
Absolutely. That's
Okay.
what you have to do. And we'll be doing that, but because of the times, this email was sent on Friday and the ratification vote was today.
Sure.
So you'll see in the email, if you turn into the email, it's from me to Mr. Lee with a copy to Ms. Hopkins and everybody else on the management bargaining committee. This was the documentation of my telephone call with Mr. Lee late Friday afternoon, where we changed our proposal on the COLAs, and then we changed our proposal slightly on the take-home cars. So we moved the take-home cars to the second and third year, and you can see that first bullet will not become effective in any respect until fiscal year starting July 1, 2019. And in that fiscal year, the city will supply 50% of those officers who do not have take-home vehicles with cars. In other words, we'll require half of the cars in the second year and half of the cars in the third year. And then we made some other slight changes in the GO per the request of the union. One of them was we have privileges set in the GO, which we'll talk about, that go to what you can do when you have the car in the city. But we've extended those privileges to people who live in Anne Arundel, so the officers who live in Anne Arundel County. And then for officers outside of Anne Arundel County, we have imposed a $50 per pay compensation back for the use of the vehicle. The union asked us to exempt those people who had already had take-home cars as part of a special assignment, and we agreed to do that.
How often are they paid?
Every pay.
I know, every pay. How often are they paid?
They're paid twice a month, bi-weekly?
Thank you.
Yeah, bi-weekly. So you'll see the details in there. We had to go through a lot of the details on how we distribute the cars. We do it by lottery, and the reason why we wanted to do it by lottery instead of by seniority is because we wanted to benefit all the officers, not just the most senior. So we're looking to benefit the junior officers who are the most subject to attack in terms of trying to get them to leave us and go to some other place. So we wanted to get them to take home cars earlier. That's the email that you have. And then let's go to the take-home car program. Just pull that up. All right, here we go. So the one I'm looking at is dated June 13th of 2018. And so this tracks a lot of the take-home car GOs in a lot of the jurisdictions that have them, the municipalities that have them. So a lot of the counties have them, the municipalities have them, and they all are different. So some of them have different restrictions, some of them have air miles restrictions, some of them have geographic restrictions that are tied to counties. So it's a kind of a smorgasbord of what you do. And councils, my experience at least in negotiating these, as I have down through the years, they just have different views on what the restrictions should be. It doesn't necessarily tie into anything that is tied to the geography.
Alderman Arnett has a question.
Yes.
Steve, it looks like we have two identical things. GOs. Is that intentional?
You probably just got a duplicate.
All right.
Yours should say, there's only one GO, it should say June 13th, 2018.
Yeah, okay.
There should be no track changes in it, it should be clean.
It has track changes.
All right, so you should ignore the track changes one and look at the clean one.
I have both with track changes.
He does?
Oh, wait.
You have track changes?
Yeah, 3 different track changes depending on the back.
Oh,
I don't know why mine
do
doesn't.
you have two of these or just one?
Yeah, let's go through that.
Blank pages.
So that I understand what we're doing.
Bunch of back pages.
Okay, yeah, I got it.
So these look like,
Okay.
right, but then
So let's
Bob
use-
has
let's-
one with blank
let's-
pages.
Let's use the track changes one. So this should be a,
Wait a minute, we're trying to, all right, so give me back mine, okay. All right, thank you.
I knew this wouldn't be perfect.
So the one on the back is the
All right. So we all have a document that has a track change down in 04B, secondary employment. You see
Correct.
there's
Well-
crossouts there?
Yes,
Okay, good. So we're looking at the same document now. All right?
thank you.
No problem. All right, so this reads just like a general, if you're familiar with general orders of the police department, this reads in the format just like a general order. We decided to do it this way because you spend a lot of time regulating the use. So it is tailor-made for a general order rather than being in a collective bargaining agreement. It doesn't mean it doesn't have the force of an agreement. It doesn't mean that it's somewhat of lesser status. It's what we agreed to, or at least what the union has ratified.
Mr., may I ask? This doesn't mean that the next chief, for example, can come in and change?
It doesn't.
Okay, so there's a...
It doesn't. This is a
Okay.
negotiated GO.
Okay.
So this is locked in. If the council ratifies this GO is locked in for 4 years. Doesn't mean at the end of 4 years, we can't change it, or the union might decide that it wants changes in the GO. We'll negotiate them at that point in time. Okay? All right, so I'm just gonna take you through this generally. So the first part, 01, 02, 03 are all the policy and the eligibility. So B is important. Officers who reside within the city limits shall be provided a take-home vehicle. They are now already, but this encapsulates that and puts it in an order. Such officers shall not have any restrictions on personal use or of the take-home vehicle within Anne Arundel County except as otherwise provided in the policy. There shall be no reimbursement to the city for use of take-home vehicles for those people, for those officers. Currently the practice right now. Members of the officer's immediate family defined as, so there's a definition for that that's in place now, are permitted to accompany the officer when the officer is operating the take-home vehicle, provided the officer is responsible for behavior and appearance of the passengers. So you can see it gets into the details of this. So the next segment of people are officers who reside outside the city limits but inside Anne Arundel County. They are provided a take-home vehicle, and if you look at the email says they have the same rights and restrictions as somebody who resides in the city. So those two groups are now combined in terms of restrictions. Officers who reside in the city and officers who reside in the county. Then D, officers who reside outside Anne Arundel County shall provide a take-home vehicle. The use of take-home vehicles shall be restricted to travel to and from city of employment. And that's been modified by my email. We're permitting the officers to, if on their way to and from employment, if they drop off family, they can do that. So school, sports activities, whatever. So that's modified. Such officers shall reimburse the city $50 per pay period through payroll deduction. All officers and command staff who reside outside Arundel County and have take-home vehicles are subject to the reimbursement. So right now, command staff who live outside the county don't have reimbursement, but they will if this is ratified by the council. So we'll start charging the command staff. General requirements. So this is all the technical aspects of the general order that are what I'll call the operational aspects of it. So officers may use the officers' assigned vehicles for extra duty assignments, so secondary employment. There's a general order pertaining to secondary employment that's already in place that details what the officer can do and can't do in that secondary employment. We saw no need to change for it, so we just made a reference to it. Off-duty use of the vehicle, so this whole section talks about what requirements there are for officers who are using the vehicle off-duty. They can only be driven by sworn members of the police department. They need to monitor the radio. They need to advise the police communications operator when going in and out of service. They'll use their last assigned post number. The officer has to be armed with an issued approved sidearm when they operate that vehicle out of duty. They have to carry their equipment with them. When they are leaving the vehicle unattended, like in a shopping mall or a parking lot, they have to remove the weapon. So this gets into the nines, and I'm not sure I really need to go through all that, but this gets all the way through into the detail about what can be put on the car, what can't be put on the car, and how they can operate it. So if I go down to miscellaneous, we've installed the right to, well, we have the right now to install GPS in those cars so we can track take-home vehicles, and we've limited the use of the GPS for enforcement of the GO and for investigation complaints. So if you have a resident that complains, or if somebody complains, I just saw a police car go through a red light or something like this, didn't have her sirens on, or at some place that they have a question on, we can investigate that using the GPS to monitor where the officer had been with the car. So when they're on leave, or on sick leave, when they're on annual leave, when they're on administrative leave, when they're in training, wherever they're not engaged as providing law enforcement to the community, they're going to leave their car with us, so they won't be able to operate that. When they've been suspended, you know, their right to use the vehicle has been suspended. If you see 4 on the top of the third page there, the city shall have the right to assign specific vehicles, so we don't want to get into arguments with the officers or the union about who gets what vehicle, or I didn't get, you know, the vehicle I wanted. We want to make sure that we have the right to assign vehicles and to change assignment of vehicles. Obviously, we won't do it for, the chief and his staff won't do it for arbitrary reasons, but we, you know, if we need to change somebody's vehicle out, we wanted the right to do that. Off-duty enforcement. So this is a whole provision about what they're expected to do. Sorry, go ahead.
So second page, number 7, which is struck out.
Second page, number 7.
Why was it removed about ensuring the off-duty officers will ensure their dress and appearance does not reflect unfavorably?
So we had some discussion about that.
Because I remember an occurrence, I can't remember if it was in this county or not, but somebody having a hat in their car that was, I think, had something
So we had some discussion
inappropriate
about that. And in the interest of cooperation with the union, what we talked about is we wanted not professional attire, but we expected business attire or some neat appearance in the car. Business casual. So if somebody had a golf shirt, or somebody had a short sleeve shirt and was driving the car, it's perfectly acceptable. What we didn't want is somebody to look at that, an officer driving the vehicle, and say, well, who could, you know, why do they dress like that? So I think that's a standard that everybody recognizes. They asked us to take that out and said they would cooperate with us about that dress, and so we are going to trust that process to work.
So they can't wear a sweatshirt that says, I don't care.
Yeah, no sweatshirt saying I don't care, or dresses, or whatever she wore, or whatever. Right, right. So everybody understands that. I mean, I think that our officers are, you know, certainly, I can tell you just from the conduct during negotiations, we had, I think, 4 or 5 members of the officers, sworn officers on the unions committee. These individuals are very professional. They take their jobs very seriously. They take their appearance very seriously. They came dressed to negotiations. They were, if they were in plain clothes, they came in plain clothes that were like completely appropriate. So we don't have a problem with this. We're not going to have a problem.
Did they bring their guns to the negotiation?
They might have, but I didn't pay attention to them. So we have a lot of different kinds of language, body language in negotiations. That so far has not been one of them. All right, so miscellaneous, I went through that. So basically, we can take the vehicle away if it's a disciplinary issue. So if there's been abuse of the vehicle, or abuse of the rules, or violations of the restrictions, we can move to take the vehicle away from the officer. You know, this talks about seat belts and minor accidents and what to do on that. Light duty assignments, if somebody's on light duty, they don't have a take-home car. So maintenance and appearance of the equipment, gets into the nines about how they maintain their cars and what they do about maintenance of them. Generally speaking, what's been experienced in other jurisdictions is that police officers do a very good job of maintaining the cars you give them, because they take them home and they wash them and they keep them clean, and they take pride in their appearance and take pride in their operation. So, not saying that they won't suffer wear and tear. Our vehicles will have more wear and tear. That's built into the. Ms. Sutherland has built that into the budget process. She's made estimates based upon our experience about what wear and tear we're expecting and what kind of increased costs we will have. It's all part of the budget process. So, is there anything else I need to say here? So if you look on the last page, there's a provision for administrative sanctions, which I talked about earlier about administrative removal of the take-home car program when there's a neglectful, when the officer is neglectful or abusive. So this took a while to negotiate. As we talked about earlier when I met with you earlier, it was a long time assembling this information. And Ms. Lehman and Ms. Sutherland and Ms. Hopkins, along with Captain Amoya from the police department, did a lot of work, put in a lot of hours, going through and determining costs and determining what the picture would look like if we were able to do this. So if this program gets accepted by the council, you all owe them a debt of gratitude, because they put a lot of hours into calculating this stuff, and made sure that their numbers were right, and double and triple checked them, and did a number of things. So that's, I think, where we are with police.
Alderman Henson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In the provision, section 3B, it allows for transporting your family members. I would, as a side note, I don't know if child is defined with stepchild as well, but I don't know if we had envisioned that too. But my question is, have we calculated the insurance impact? It seems like that would maybe open up our liability to all those other passengers should there be an accident. Do we self-insure for those things as well, or do we have a collision liability coverage for?
We do self-insure for that. And no, we can't project what those costs would be.
Okay. And then when we're envisioning the GPS tracking, have we factored into doing the GPS tracking, or is that just kind of something that we're leaving out there for an option, or do we know if that's going to be a part of the program?
I would say we just installed it right. Okay, so again, I think the department needs to make a decision. Are we going to use GPS or not? I didn't want to have a situation where we wanted to use GPS and we'd have to go back and negotiate this. I wanted to install it right now.
Do we know if the department plans to use the GPS feature to enforce the agreement?
Don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Don't know the answer to that.
I envision that if we use the GPS feature, then there would have to be, I guess, a supervisor or someone who takes the time to look at the GPS, to calculate it, I know that sometimes when we add things on, there are those other soft variables that increase costs, like maybe overtime if you are overseeing the take-home car program of the people that you are, I'm not sure what the term is for the structure of the chain of command at a police department, but if they're subordinates and you oversee those subordinates and now this becomes part of your duties in overseeing them, if we've envisioned what the extra cost would be in terms of employee hours.
So I think that there's a different, I think one of the things that we have planned for in the budget is we know that there's going to be an extra cost for maintenance service personnel because we're going to have 40 more vehicles than we have right now. So we know that there's going to be that in connection with it. There are a number of different ways we can assemble information about potential abuse or neglect of vehicles. So the service records are one of them, the mileage is one of them. So we know where the officers live, we know what the mileage is. So if somebody lives 50 miles away and all of a sudden they're putting 100 miles each way or 200 miles on the car, then we can kind of sort of have that be a trigger. I don't think anybody factored in what you're talking about, which is we may need additional administrative personnel, may not be sworn officers, but additional administrative personnel to maybe monitor that situation. I think a lot of it depends upon how the vehicle mileage goes compared to what we expect it to be.
I saw there was a provision in here about obeying traffic laws. Do we know if a person gets one of those speeding tickets or red light tickets when they're operating the vehicle someplace else, is that the officer's responsibility to pay for, or do
Yes,
we
ma'am.
pay for that?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Why would we pay for law violations?
For an officer.
Just a theoretical question there.
Yes, for the light duty assignments, does that include everyone that's in desk duty, or is that only for temporary? Is light duty, I guess I just want to make sure I understand what light duty is. Is light duty everyone who's a sworn officer that performs an administrative function, or is light duty a temporary designation if for some reason you have some other factor?
So if you have a service-related injury,
Okay,
one of the things that's available to you and to us, more likely available to us, is a light duty assignment. So that means that we will take, if it's a patrol officer, we would take the officer off the street and we would assign him or her to an administrative duty assignment. That would trigger this provision, and there would be no take-home car because the officer would, by definition, would not be allowed to be a police officer on the street because he or she is in light duty status. Light duty means they can't perform the job that they're ordinarily responsible for, whether it's patrol or whatever it might be, and so they're in the light duty status.
is it temporary in nature?
Yes, most of the time it's, so, yeah, we don't do permanent light duty because that deprives us of the use of an officer permanently. So we don't,
So we
we
would
work
still.
with people in terms of the duration of light duty in the program that we have.
So we would still have to incur the cost of that take-home car because it's a temporary designation that you're light duty. So it would not be that if they were light duty, we would somehow not have the take-home car. We would still have to have in the fleet a take-home car.
We would put it in the fleet. We'd make it available if we needed to have a substitute car. So there's other uses for that vehicle that we might have. We could put it, is generally available for patrol if an officer doesn't have, if an officer's his car has been serviced or her car has been serviced or there's been an accident, we can substitute that car in. I wouldn't count on it, and I know we have a certain amount of light duty positions or light duty positions, but this is not something that you can plan on. But again, we would still be paying, if it's a purchase, we'd be paying the purchase price. If it's a lease, we'd pay the lease. But if the car sat, we wouldn't be paying gas or use cost, right, use cost.
Okay. If I'm adding all the subtotals correctly, by year 2022, all the three of the packages would add $3,002,000, $3,002,056. Ms. Sutherland, do we have projections in revenue that would take us up to meeting that $3 million, or how can we afford that?
So I believe that our revenues will be growing sufficient to cover the cost of living increases and the steps. We will be using we'll be using some of the vehicle replacement money that we talked about to pay for the leases. So it's a combination of funding sources that are going to cover the cost of these contracts. In this year's budget, you had the $938,000. We had $275,000 for VEBA, of which we're now going to be saving $165,000, $175,000, right? Because they've given that up. We've got the money set aside in the vehicle replacement fund that we can use to lease or purchase vehicles. We're probably going to go with the lease on that. I have looked at our growth in revenues. If you take the growth in the personnel costs, they are, including steps, they're about 3.5% to 4.5%, and I do expect our revenues to grow by that much.
At the end of this life cycle, to be able to accommodate, and the growth in
Yes.
revenue is attributed to what?
Growth in property tax assessments, hopefully an expanded economy, growth in income taxes. We want to look at some new revenue sources that might be available to us, like hotel tax on certain rentals that we're not currently getting hotel tax on, and any number of options.
So if we don't have all of those measures succeed, is there is there a fail-safe there that should we not have any of those things passed, and should we only have the funding sources that are available to us right now for revenue, that the current funding sources we have for revenue now would grow to accommodate this number, or is that predicated on passing some of those other measures that would
I
open
believe the
other
current
doors?
revenues we have will grow to be sufficient to cover this.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah, I think I have three questions. One of them I think you just answered. The obvious question on the cars is, do we have the money in the budget in the leasing of these vehicles, and wasn't a moving goalpost in these negotiations? Sounds like we do. Okay. On health insurance, I know, health costs are probably going to go up 5% every year, plus, that's so I guess their participation increase is enough for you to say that there will be savings. You're pretty confident about that.
So think about this for a minute.
Yeah.
If health insurance goes up every year, that by the time we get to the second year, that 25%, the growth from 20% to 25% is even more, because you're building on top of what you have is a 20%. So nobody wishes meteoric rise in healthcare costs. We don't want 14% or 10%, whatever the city's percentage increase is. But the move from 20% to 25% reflects to a great degree market conditions. So out in the market, the private sector and a lot of public sectors are at 25%.
Mm-hmm.
Private sector is going between 25% and 30%. So in the private sector, they're putting more and more costs on the employees, more and more of a share of the costs on the employees, and they're not capping it. So there are some contracts that cap the cost, but our contract is not capped. So their cost, everybody's cost floats as our total costs increase. I think this will definitely save us money over what we would be paying otherwise. Absolutely save us money. And will impose a significant cost on the families, on the employees that have family coverage.
Okay. And my last question is, and there may be an obvious answer, I'm not sure, is the 4-year contract, if you will, versus 1 year. What was this advantage of locking in the 4 years? Is it locking it in? Could you speak to that?
That's exactly the advantage. So the difference between having 1-year contracts and having a 4-year contract is that you have to negotiate every year. And so every year the market conditions change. So we're making a bet, in a way, that inflation and the other kind of factors are going to be higher than we anticipate. And so if we got to the end of the 4th year, if we didn't have a 4-year agreement, we may be paying more percentages of COLA than we otherwise would be, because of market conditions, because of recruiting conditions in the police department, or recruiting conditions in the fire department. So we're betting here that this market is going to grow faster than costs than it actually is. That's one of the reasons why we do a 4-year agreement. The second reason why we do a 4-year agreement is because now we have a lock on our labor costs for 4 years. We know what they're going to be. For long-range planning, for capital asset planning, for money that you might acquire for other uses that you might otherwise use for employees, you have that ability now to budget that money for other uses, because you now have control for 4 years of labor costs. That's another advantage. Now, yeah, the COLA numbers are higher. There are 3s. We've had COLAs in 3s before, but they are generally they are generally higher. But again, our bet is that inflation is going to grow more than that. We're not going to get into a recession like we did in 2008. We're going to actually be inflationary, because the economy is heating up. And when the economy heats up, the job vacancies they go, and you don't have anybody to fill them. So that means employers in general are paying more money to get people in the door. So that puts upward pressure on wages, and we're betting that that's going to happen.
Alderman Henson, sorry.
Thank you. Did we have, use any comparables when we were negotiating, particularly the, take-home car program?
Yes.
It's my understanding for Anne Arundel County that it's only permitted if you're an officer that lives in the county. I know that you all have the benefit of all that extra information and you vetted the fairness of them, but.
So there's many municipalities that have take-home car vehicles. Not every municipality obviously has a police force of any size. So you're competing with the sheriff's offices in the county and you're competing with municipalities. So for example, Ocean City has a take-home car vehicle where the officers all live, none of them live in Ocean City. So they live in Wacomico County, they live in Sussex County, Delaware. They take the cars into the county. They don't keep them in Ocean City because they don't live there. Greenbelt, for example, has a take-home car program. Greenbelt is, I think, 120 air miles. It's a long way. You're way out there. And it's a graduated use. So there's some use within a 50 air mile radius. There's less use. So when you get beyond 50 miles, you have to leave it at the nearest volunteer fire department or police station that's closest to the mile limit, whether it's 50 miles or 75 miles. So there are programs out there that go beyond the city limits that are part of the negotiated process in municipalities. So we have plenty of comparables for that. This program here is probably right in line with everybody else, and not every program has a reimbursement policy. There's a lot of programs where take-home car is free. This program has a reimbursement for people who live outside the county.
I know that if we vote on this tonight, that the opportunity will be foreclosed to have any other comparables, but it would have been helpful to me in vetting the contract to see some of the comps from the other
We certainly
jurisdictions.
can provide that information.
Thank you.
Alderman Arnett? No.
Sorry. This doesn't have a financial impact, but I was talking with former alderman, and we haven't talked about General Order Number 2. I see relatively few changes here, but I'm assuming these were reflected because there were some concerns about unfairness in testing and things like that, and that's all ironed out?
Yeah, so the GO has some changes with respect to process, some slight changes with respect to process, some slight changes with respect to qualifications. So we had a discussion about you know, the rule that the chief uses in terms of taking people from the list. We had a situation where the list was exhausted, so we wanted to make sure that we had the right to accelerate testing because we've got vacancies to fill. So a lot of that is I think Alderman Arnett, you're right. Part of that is all process in terms of what's not working, we need to fix this. None of it are really what I'll call really strategic, significant changes. They're all adjustments that make the program, the promotional program, run better.
Well, and hopefully make morale better.
So I would say hopefully make morale better. This department is not the only department around that has morale issues. All you do is look north of Baltimore City. There's huge morale issues there.
Right.
Part of it is because there's 400 or 500 vacancies in the police department up there. So think about that. It's 400 or 500 vacancies in the city police department. There's a lot of stress that police officers have right now. They get stressed in their jobs, they're stressed in the community. They're under a microscope. So all that kind of sort of reflects in how they serve and how they look at the command staffs. The best thing we can do is support them as best we can, provide them whatever information and equipment we can give them, and back them up. And I'm sure that Chief Baker that's part of his agenda.
Looking at the financial sheet, have we made a decision about purchase versus leases?
I'm sorry, about what?
Purchasing vehicles versus lease.
We have not. It's certainly leaning towards either leasing, a flat out lease at the end, or financing it as you would with a car loan. There's some pretty good interest rates out there at 1.9%. I think Frederick County got It kind of depends how much of it we can combine together. Perhaps we can combine some fire apparatus purchases, have one finance company finance the whole thing. So we have not. We are still working through what's the best way to go with that, but I believe it's either going to be a lease or it's going to be a car loan. It's not going to be, I can't see us paying cash. It's not going to fit.
So, a process question, Alderwoman Hinson just mentioned voting tonight. I thought the purpose of the resolution was that we would get all of the strike changes, be able to look at this, go through, like just on fire, there was 43 pages plus 2 other documents, and we haven't seen a police document of the same sort. But the question is, when we vote, it's never been a clear process. Are we voting on a resolution that accepts, so there'll be a actual resolution that puts forth the 4 union negotiations for the council to ratify by virtue of passing that resolution?
So, in my mind, you have, the next step for us is just to take the fire track changes, make it clean, and have the fire officers who are on the union and the city management people sign that and present it to you. The police has got one more step. We have to take the memo and put it into a track changes version, get that through the union with our changes like we've done with the fire, and then sign that, either present it to you and sign it. But the changes in the police agreement are not as much as the fire agreement. If you look at the changes there don't have as many benefits as the fire officers have in their agreement. There's not that many changes. The changes, the GO, and you have that now. There's, we'll just produce a clean copy of that with the email. So, I mean, to me, the process is that you ratify the agreement, just like they did. Now, they ratified the documents that you have, so they presented the union members with the documents and with the provisions. This is your COLA, this is your take-home car program, and the union officers, both for fire and police, have voted on those. You could technically do the same thing tonight. Nothing's stopping you from doing that, except if you want to see clean copies of the agreement. So I hear a request for comparables on the GO program. There's some other, I think, other requests that you guys had, you all had tonight. But, I mean, there's nothing stopping you from ratifying these things tonight.
So, in my conversation with the law office in the back a few minutes ago, you can vote tonight to ratify the contracts based on what we've presented to you as being the terms of those contracts. We then clean everything up, everybody signs everything, city signs, union sign. It comes back to you on July 9th to have the signed agreement comes before you for approval on July 9th.
So there's one more thing that you're going to have to review on July 9th, and that's the pension plan. So we're making revisions to the pension plan. Part of the benefits that you see here are going to be put into those revisions. There's other structural revisions that we're making, like we talked about, the 2 representatives being part of the planning commission. So you're going to see that as well.
Alderman Savage.
Just go ahead, I'll come back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess, I mean, at first I was seeing the clear benefit to the 4-year contract, but I'm kind of worried now. I mean, it seems like it does put us in a bit of a, it's a gamble, right? It puts us in a potential bind. If the economy does tank, does this tie our hands? Would we not be able to even look at furloughs or layoffs? And so would that mean we would have to essentially go to the non-reps?
Furloughs or layoffs.
How would that work if we already have a contract in place?
You have the right to have furloughs and layoffs. This contract doesn't prevent you from doing that. There's nothing in the contract that prevents you from taking structural changes in the department. You have an obligation to bargain with the union over the effects of those, whether you're gonna pay severance pay or how you're gonna do it, who gets it and how it gets done. But none of these contracts prohibit furloughs or layoffs. They're not guaranteed contracts that every officer has a guaranteed job for 4
Okay.
years.
And so what about the non-reps?
The what?
The non-represented employees, are they gonna be able to share in the COLA? Are they gonna get the COLA? And has that,
So who's not represented?
In the budget, we have budgeted for the non-represented employees to get the same cost of living increases as the represented employees.
okay, and that's good. Yeah, I'm glad that they won't be left out. But so what about, how does this affect the bottom line in terms of the 8.9 cent tax increase?
You budgeted enough in the 938,000 reserve, and what we have in VEBA that we're now gonna save to cover the cost of these contracts. It's amazingly close to the penny. I told you I wouldn't go over, I didn't go over.
Good job.
So you're still at the same, same budget that you were at 3:20 a.m. last week.
Okay. The other thing that just gives me a little bit of heartburn, so, I mean, it helps when I hear you say that you foresee revenue increasing enough to pay for this, because, I mean, it's essentially another, 2.3 million, I think, if you compare fiscal year 19 to fiscal year 22, and that's essentially, I mean, I know this would be all set by revenue, but that's kind of, 4 cents of an increase through the tax? 3.6, okay, there you go, it's ahead of me. So I mean, that's the one thing I kind of would like to see a little more.
So if you take
Some more
the
numbers
cost
on
of these contracts, what you see in the handout that Melissa gave you, where you have the costs in fiscal year 2022, for example, on AFSCME, that COLA is the cumulative cost of the COLAs from year 1, carried over into year 2, carried over into year 3, right? So it's 4 years of the first COLA, 3 years of the second COLA, 2 years of the third year's COLA, and 1 year of the fourth year COLA. So when I take all of these costs, I have, hold on for just a minute. Collectively, these agreements are an average 3.1% increase a year. I am confident my revenues are going to go up 3.1% a year.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Arnett?
So, to continue the theme, first of all, it was extremely helpful to see the track changes, because then we can figure out where you were going. We don't have quite that same thing for police, but I'm interested in having a more formal process, I believe, than we've had in the past. That's why I kind of like the idea of there being a resolution that ratifies the contracts, which we don't have in front of us, but is then something that is a document that we can go back to do the resolution. This has always been kind of a loosey-goosey thing in the past. First of all, this will be the only crack that this council will get at the union negotiations. It'd be nice to have something that memorializes what we did, but it also seems like it's appropriate to formalize what we did. So I guess the process question is, we have more to do, particularly for police, than anybody else, but then are we going to get 4 documents that are the clean documents that have been ratified by the unions and, in fact, by the administration? I'm trying to figure out what the role is left for the council. I mean, if the unionists have agreed and the administration has agreed, what's our role? I mean, does it make a difference if we agree or don't agree? Well,
Teresa?
Yeah, no, I'm just,
Okay.
I'm looking for a more formal process and also,
Okay, so the city code requires us to submit to you the proposed memorandum of understanding of the collective bargaining agreements
right,
by March.
right,
We're going to do it on July 9th.
right.
So on July 9th, you will have submitted to you clean copies of all of the agreements. What you are being asked to do tonight is vote on whether you want to ratify those agreements and you want us to move forward with signing those agreements on behalf of the city.
Without seeing them.
Well, you've seen all the changes that are being made to the contracts now. So you've seen them in a form that identifies those changes. The only thing you're going to see that you haven't seen is a clean version of the contract that contains all those track changes that you have in front of you right now. So if we came to you tonight and we gave you clean copies of the contract and said, here they are, we would be sitting here for a long time identifying what changes were made in the contract.
No, I
So
get
our
that.
choice really is,
Right.
so part of the timing for this year, this process, was dictated by the complexity of the negotiations, the take-home car program, the ratification process by both unions, which is why we don't have a clean copy of the contract to give you along with these track changes. I would suspect that the Office of Law would be religious in connection of making sure that the clean copy of the contract reflected all the changes that were made in the draft changes, and be able to present to you a copy of the contract that they can then say to you is, this incorporates all the changes, so you don't need to go through the process. If you wanted to, that would be great, but you wouldn't need to go through the process of making sure that if we change the to then, we actually did that in the contract. So the idea, in my own view of this, is the idea about a debate and notice and discussion about a collective bargaining agreement is occurring right now. We're doing it right now. We're talking about why we made those changes, what the market conditions are, what the specific changes are, what the rationale for 4 years was, why the COLAs are the way the COLAs are, all those things we're debating right now. In my mind, when we get to July 9th, there's no reason for discussion unless somebody has an additional thought from stuff that was information that we gave to them from here on out. It would be just, okay, these are clean versions, we've talked about this, we can go forward. I'm not trying to curtail debate or foreclose debate, but I'm saying we have the resources right now to do that, and you have identified those things. Now, you may say that you need more time to think about whether there should be a GO or what other information you may want to consider in saying yes or no. You definitely have to say yes or no. This is a contract of major importance that's entered into by the city. It's millions of dollars that we're committing, but more importantly, and I'm sorry I'm doing this, but more importantly, it's a contract that supports the officers that work for us. So this is a major thing. You shouldn't be saying what's more left for us to do. This is an important part of your role as far as I'm concerned.
I agree, and that's why having a matter of minutes to see a take-home policy and ratify it, I can't even get my head around the number of different take-home categories. Live in the city, lived in the county, live 100 miles away, live 200 miles. What are the fees? All of those things. I just think it would be irresponsible to not have some time to look at what you've done. I mean, I have the sense that there's a vote coming up in a matter of minutes to ratify, and I think that's not very responsible for us to not take a moment to understand what it is we're ratifying. But that could just be me.
Alderman Penn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I couldn't agree more with the comments from my colleague from Ward 8. The contract appears to me to cost some $675,000 for this year, which is under what we had budgeted. That's a good thing. But, you know, it jumps to 3.1 million by 2022. We're talking about, for the city, a large amount of money. And I don't think this is something that, clear though the explanations might have been this evening, I don't think it's, I think it's something I'd like to take home and take a look at, because until, maybe it's a lawyer in me coming out, but until I see a final contract, what exactly I'm going to be voting on, I don't really feel like I'm in a position to say yay or nay. I think, you know, if we vote to ratify this tonight and have them proceed, that's fine, that's good, but, well, it might be fine and good. But I think most of us would have a hard time voting to have these ratified tonight and then find something in the next 2 weeks and say, oh, nope, can't vote for it. I think effectively you are voting in favor of the contract tonight, which may or may not be a good thing or a bad thing, but I don't feel like, I just don't feel comfortable doing that when we're talking about, well, particularly because we're talking about 4 years from now will be or 3 years, no, 4 years from now will be a large, a much larger chunk of money. Thank you.
Honorable Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if I've mentioned, you look tired. You look like you've worked really, really hard on this. I just want to thank you.
It was an early day today. It's been a long weekend, but I'm fine. I've got enough energy left.
I'm putting my estimator hat on here, but what would be helpful is when I look at this this one page, I see what I think of as the right-hand side, what we're spending, and verbally, Teresa has reassured us that we're okay on the left-hand side, the pro forma, and I think what would be helpful is actually just to see that in an executive summary of some sort of what you have said, which is, you know, we're okay with what we assumed here and what we assumed here and what we assumed here, and I think we're going to have 3%, you know, revenue in the next 4 years. I think we sort of need that memorialized on a piece of paper somehow. I think, that's at least what I would feel comfortable with. I mean, I think we have to trust the process. We basically are ratifying something that is ratified subject to our ratification. But I think what it comes down to is, are we okay in the pro forma? And I trust our city manager in saying that we are. We probably just need to see that. Is that fair to ask? Sure.
Okay. So, Steve, in your opinion, so the 4-year deal is, in your experience, puts us in a better position as a city or not?
It does. I think you are, so for a number of reasons. One is that you have locked in your labor costs for 4 years, which allows you to make planning with the money that you have, that you're not devoting to the labor expenses. So you don't have, for example, the knowledge that at year 3 or year 2 or year 1 you have to renegotiate these collective bargaining agreements. Again, like I said to you before, it's somewhat predictive of what is going on right now in the region as a whole and nationwide. The market is becoming much tighter for employers to hire people. There's upward pressure on wages, and we're going to see that upward pressure result in poorer quality people we attract to police and fire if we don't keep pace with these wages. So there's a different reason for having a 4-year agreement. That is that we need to advance our labor pricing, so to speak. So that's one of them. So lock in rates for 4 years. Another is you don't go through the expense of negotiating, the pure expense of negotiating contracts. So whether you hire me or you use the Office of Law or you use another labor attorney, you're still gonna have expense, so you've deferred that expense for a year, to permit the fourth year to go in. The third is that you've, what I'll call put in labor peace. So you've got a contract that doesn't unsettle the bargaining unit. They don't have to go through, the union members don't have to go through the process of trying to figure out what their demands are gonna be and deal with the command staffs in connection with that. So the command staffs don't have to go through that planning for another year. That's also a deferred expense, and a favorable one because you're planning less for the new collective bargaining agreement. You got a year that you don't have to plan now. And it's always good for employers, unless they predict that the environment is changing very rapidly. So that's when you want short-term agreements. Or like we did last year, we had an agreement last year because the city's finances were at the tail end of the 3-year assessment and they were not clear. So we decided to defer. That's why you had a 1-year agreement last year. So those are the reasons.
Thank you. Alderman Savage.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I mean, I do want to thank everybody involved. These agreements at first look do look very good, and thank you for your thorough explanation. I'm still not comfortable, though, voting on this tonight. I mean, really, these are 3 months late anyway, right? They were supposed to, this should have come to us in March, so if we delay another 1 to 2 weeks, I don't see how that's going to be too much of a problem. I hope it won't be too much of a problem.
Alderman Elliott? I'm okay with it. Yeah.
If I may, Mr. City Attorney, this resolution really has no meaning unless we suspend the rules and approve it on second reader tonight, right? Unless we're going to approve it at our next council meeting, and then, but by that time, things will have already been delayed.
Well, when you say it has no meaning, it does what other resolutions in the past have done, and that is to extend the time period for approving the union agreements.
Was there a second? We suspended the rules. Why didn't we suspend?
You don't have to suspend the rules with the resolution. It was adopted on first reader at your meeting on the 18th and on second reader today.
It was?
I don't have a copy. I rely on the city clerk. I don't have a copy of those minutes to.
All right. So then moving on to the second point, if we now pass this on second reader to postpone, it's still unclear to me what is it that's happening on July 9th if we vote to ratify tonight, which I don't even know how we do that.
We don't
if we
have to.
do
We
it,
can leave some of them
what
off,
does
yeah.
the postponement mean?
Well, I'm just looking at the purpose of the postponement. I think it was to give you an opportunity to review the documents that might not be available to you this evening. And so we have to start there. If that's not the desire of the body, then that's something to consider.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, we need to test the desire of the body.
If I could, in response to Alderwoman Tierney's question, there's only one other piece of information I could think that we could even give you, okay, beyond what we've already given you. So just so you know, for context, you are correct that over year 4, it's a $3 million cost. The base pay right now for these 4 unions is $24.1 million, almost 24.2. So you're talking over 4 years, $750,000 increase a year on a $24 million base. It's roughly a 3% increase each year for 4 years. We know that our property tax assessments in total went up 9%. Things are getting rolled in over a 3-year assessment cycle. We know income taxes are going to go up. We didn't bank on it in the budget because we don't know how much it is, but they will go up as a result of the federal tax law. So I am very comfortable with these numbers. There are no more numbers we can give you than what we've given you.
Alderwoman Tierney?
Are you done? Yeah, let me just clarify. I'm not suggesting I need that to vote on tonight. What I am asking for is some sort of list of assumptions or what have you. So a year from now, we know what and why and how, what we did. And everything you say, I believe, and it is, and that's, and I don't see that on this sheet as far as those very simple assumptions that you're speaking of. So just to memorialize them and know.
I'd be very happy to put them on the record tonight if that would make a difference for you.
That's all, just so for, as I said, a year from now, when something goes wrong, we'll say, oh, we thought it would do this, and it just to help us in our collective interest.
Or I can follow up with, some kind of
Yeah.
communication to you that lays out what the assumptions were on each
Or
of them.
to,
So, for example, on health insurance.
Yeah.
We assumed that health insurance is gonna go up 8% a year.
Boom.
And that in year 3, we're going to a 75-25 split.
And I think this body needs to know that those assumptions, I'm not gonna get into vehicles and all that. We really, in this time frame, you have to admit, you're asking us to trust the process. I believe that, and that's what you're hired to do, to negotiate. So we can just ask pretty broad questions, and mine is pretty broad as far as, what are our assumptions, and
Yeah, we
so
don't
that's-
want you to make a decision based upon a feeling or a conclusion that you lack information, okay? But there is a whole process that takes place before we get to you. And we are in the weeds in this process. I mean, completely in the weeds. Right, you don't want to go there because it's the minutia of how much overtime, how many hours, how many people, what the vacancies are. There's lots of minutia that go into how we decide what we're going to spend in terms of collective bargaining. Whether there's equipment that's needed, all that kind of stuff. We're into that minutia all the time in collective bargaining. And so what our hope was is just to give you the exact changes that are occurring in a track changes version, or at least with the police in a memo that says this is what we're going to have. And converting that to an agreement, now that we have a ratified document, shouldn't take us very long at all.
Alderwoman Pinto-Charles?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What might be helpful, I guess, at this point, since there seems to be some questions, if everybody would just kind of lay out their questions tonight, and provide them to you, so you will be able to give a succinct explanation or answer, because there seems to be a flurry of different kinds of questions. So maybe if we got them all out on the table now, that might be helpful in your responses. Does that make any sense?
Taking notes.
No.
So, Teresa, if we decide not to ratify the police today, is this body comfortable with moving ahead with ASME and fire, or not?
Here's my dilemma, Mr. Mayor. I understand how hard the staff have worked and how hard the unions have worked, and I'm appreciative that they've come to an agreement. But I could not look any of my constituents in the eye and tell them I know the details of this agreement. I think the take-home car is a very complicated agreement. I don't know that I could swear to you that I'll know any better tomorrow if I had this document and we voted tomorrow. But I would say that I would feel like I'd had the time to read it. There are other things. There's things I want to look at because they impact the committee I sit on with the pension plan. The drop program has impacts on the pension fund. The changes in the pension plan, I don't really know. We just flew right through that. So I'm very frustrated. I don't know what these say, and yet I'm being asked to ratify them. I don't know that I have a viable alternative. I did think that's what the July 9th postponement was for, but apparently not.
Okay.
I'm willing to postpone that if you want, but I just want to say if
We
we
didn't
find
see
things that we
any
don't
of these
agree
until
with,
today.
we're not going to, can this body renegotiate? I mean, What?
Well, that is the other point. What difference does it make whether we ratify or not? I mean, they're
We
not gonna go
trust
back.
in, how many years'
That-
experience have you had, Steve?
Right.
More than you can count.
Yeah.
A lot of experience. I've been doing this all my professional life.
So I'm willing to leave that off if you guys say that, but we do know that we have all had time to review ASME, so we should at least move forward.
Today.
Not
We got it
ASME.
today. And in fact, it wasn't added to this until today. It
Just-
wasn't in it until today.
Teresa?
He's correct that you guys didn't get the AFSCME agreement until today. That is correct. Just don't ratify tonight. If you're not comfortable ratifying tonight, don't ratify tonight. Don't split them up. We'll get you what additional information you want. You can't renegotiate. You can vote up or you can vote down.
Right.
And we'll get you what you want, and then if we don't do it until July, we'll just have to include a provision that makes it retroactive to July 1st.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Alderman Savage, yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I was just gonna move that we postpone the vote on resolution, appropriate course of action, postpone the vote on resolution 2918?
No.
No, we've already
No?
voted on it. So-
Well, no, we have to vote on a second reader still.
We did.
You just don't take any action on this
We
business
don't have to put a
item.
motion. I could
This is
just
a
not
business
bring it up.
item, correct? You just don't take action on the
Yeah.
business item.
Yeah,
Yeah. Just don't take any action on it.
okay.
So this is a discussion we've had, you've got information in connection with that you're gonna consider at the time you actually vote on these. And that, on July 9th, they'll be presented to you for approval up or down as Sutherland suggests. But for me, so what we need as a team is whatever information you want now. It would be nice to have so we can assemble that to you and so it doesn't hit your mailboxes on July 9th, right?
So that's the
Tell us what you
frustrating.
need.
Alderman,
That's the frustrating part. All I want is time to just read the damn things. I mean, I haven't had that time.
Is there
I
a
bet
date,
you
is there
it's
a date
99
certain that we
point
can
nine-
get it to the council members so that they have the opportunity
I think
to
we-
reasonably review it prior to the July 9th?
Well, I think.
A date certain for what, Mr. Melnick?
If the council members have not yet received the documents that they need to review, is there a date certain upon which they will receive those documents
If you'll-
to ensure that they have a reasonable
If
opportunity?
you'll tell me what those documents are, right? So
The-
I know whether they're documents that already exist, they're documents we need to create, right? So tell me what you're looking for.
And
okay?
you're referring to the body, I imagine. I'm not
Yes.
prepared to answer that question.
Alderman Byrne? Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm prepared to vote on 2918 and postpone this to July the 9th.
Yeah.
And let's, postpone the deadline till July the 9th, and let's just vote on
Sure.
the union agreements at that time.
Oh, and we don't have to postpone it, we just don't bring it up, right? But first of all, I want to thank all the hard work that's gone into this. It's an incredibly hard process that you guys have been doing, and I understand, we lost a city manager, we lost a finance director, and still you powered through it. I want to thank the unions for their flexibility and their working with the city, because it takes a village, and we'll get this voted on the 9th. So thank you to everybody. I want to give you all a round of applause, so thank you.
And I'm going to ask you all, if you want additional information, don't ask me for that information on July 7th. Okay? If you want
Alderwoman
additional
Pendle
information,
Shaw.
you let me know what it is, we will get it for you.
That leaves July 8th.
And we will get it for you timely if you ask for it timely.
Yeah.
Alderwoman Pendle Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to personally thank this extraordinarily hard-working group for what you've done. And I'd just like to put it on the record that right now, I'm prepared to vote on it, but if we're gonna postpone it till July the 9th, so be it, because I feel like this is your professional job and work and career that you've done all your lives. I trust your judgment. Now, I'm just speaking for me. I'm not speaking for anybody else. Actuarial science is I see Steve shaking his head. Yeah.
It's an oxymoron.
True. And so, thank you all so very, very much for what you've done. It has not gone unnoticed, but I really appreciate the hundreds, probably thousands of hours you all have put into this, as well as those negotiators, as well as police and fire and AFSCMEs. We thank you all so very, 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 very much for all that you do for all of us on a day-to-day basis. We congratulate you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. City Attorney, please present the next item on the agenda.
The agenda has been completed.
All right, is there anything else for good order? Oh, Alderman Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I just want to, just first appreciate the patience and understanding for my colleagues so that I can just take a minute to read this brief statement. I wanted to let everyone know about this letter that I signed on to that was drafted by the Maryland Legislative Latino Caucus and signed by over 15 Maryland Latino elected officials, which is an open letter given the time of crisis that we're in currently with the separation of families and children, this crisis of terror, essentially, and how it's impacting us here in Maryland and in Anne Arundel County. And I think just because of the elevated position we are in as elected, I'm going to use this platform to just read an open letter that was released to Governor Hogan yesterday, expecting a response today. So it says, Dear Governor Hogan, like many in our state and in our nation, we were distressed to learn about the treatment of migrant families at our country's border, where Border Patrol agents acting under instructions from the Trump administration have separated over 2,000 children from their parents and housed them indefinitely in detention centers while their parents await prosecution. We were surprised to learn that Maryland also may have had a role in supporting the shameful policy of intentionally inflicting emotional distress on children and families. We request that you provide us with details regarding the deployment of Maryland National Guard troops to the border in support of this mission. In particular, when did Maryland deploy troops, how many troops were sent, and what was their mission? Did Maryland National Guard forces assist directly in separating migrant children from their families? Do they remain deployed, and if not, when did you determine that they should be withdrawn to return to Maryland? We also ask for details regarding separated migrant children that are being detained in Maryland. There is an outpouring of concern among Marylanders and a desire to help. Families, nonprofits, and churches want to do what they can to take in these children until they can be reunited with their families. How many migrant children are currently detained in Maryland facilities, and where are they? And is Maryland establishing a program for resettling the children outside of these institutions pending family reunification? Marylanders aspire to live up to the ideals of tolerance, decency, and fairness. We look forward to your prompt response to this inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Alderman Savage.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to extend an apology to the Chief of Police and to the City Attorney. Monday night, well, I guess I should say Tuesday morning, I did a poor job in terms of choosing some of my words and failing to get my points across. I by no means intended to insult your integrity, Chief, or capacity capabilities of our City Attorney. You know, I failed to make, I just simply, you know, my underlying point that I still disagree with some of your characterization of the proposed budget cuts or freezes, but by no means meant to insult your integrity. And with the City Attorney, my underlying point was that I wanted to try to push for a subject matter expert in stormwater to be, you know, included in that discussion. So, but I have complete faith in both of you, and I'm bringing this up to kind of clear the air, move forward together, and hopefully in the future we won't be making these decisions at 3 in the morning.
Yes.
And I just want to thank you, Alderman Savage, for those comments, and I look forward to respectful, honest, collaborative, good faith, and open discussions regarding matters that are before you and the rest of the City Council and that our office is involved in. We may not always agree, but we should always assume the best of intentions, so thank you.
Alderwoman Tierney?
Yes, I just wanted to say don't forget to vote tomorrow if you haven't already.
Yes.
Mr. Mayor?
Alderman
I
Paolone?
move that we adjourn.
I second that.
Aye.
Aye.
All those in favour? All right. How much for that, Chair? buddy. Thank you, man. Cool. Thank you. Cheers.